through the south of England and South Wales overnight, and those strong winds with gales for exposed spots will continue during the afternoon, eventually relenting, but still the potential for 40, 50 mile per hour gusts, and in some exposed spots 60 mile per hour gusts. Outbreaks of rain spiralling around that low, with the heaviest rain for southwest England, risk of localised flooding here, and some showers elsewhere. Brightest skies there for the northeast and the west of Scotland, and where we get some sunshine coming through, still the potential for 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will feel chilly around the North Sea coast, where we continue to see an easterly breeze into the evening and overnight. Further spells of rain for Northern Ireland, showers for western Scotland, and some persistent rain there for South Wales as well as central southern England. Showery bits and pieces elsewhere, a lot of cloud, and so a frost-free night. A grey start to the day for many, a lot of cloud cover, especially for the east coast of England and Scotland, where that cloud will be low and it'll be covering the hills. Spells of rain or drizzle coming in here through Saturday. Also outbreaks of rain for western parts of Northern Ireland into parts of southwest England, but things are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some sunshine developing for western Scotland, parts of Wales and the south of England by the afternoon. And here temperatures will reach 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will stay chilly on that North Sea coast with the wind coming in from the east. And that wind will push further cloud and spells of light rain westwards through Saturday night. However, it is an improving picture as we begin April. Brighter skies and drier conditions are expected for all of us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 12 noon and you're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst and coming up for you this Friday lunchtime. It's described by the government as the biggest trade deal since Brexit. But Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch's already had to defend the agreement with the Trans-Pacific Partnership after critics pointed out it'll only boost the GDP by 0.08%. Donald Trump becomes the first US president to ever face criminal charges, being indicted by a grand jury in New York over allegations he paid hush money to a former porn actress prior to his election in 2016. We'll have the latest from the United States as police in New York prepare for what they fear could be violent protests. And remembering the victims of the war as King Charles and the Queen Consort are on the final day of their state visit. Today in Hamburg, the city destroyed by Allied bombers in 1943, will be there live on the day of royal reconciliation. But before that, all the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU, after nearly 2 years of negotiations.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whisky. It's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth.
The significance of joining the Pacific Trade Bloc is that this is one of the fastest growing areas in the world. Around half of the world's middle-class consumers will be in this block of countries by the end of the decade. It's a massive opportunity for British exporters, and combined with the very attractive business taxes that we introduced in the budget, a £9 billion cut in corporation tax, that will mean that the UK economy has very big long-term growth opportunities.
Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to face criminal charges after he was indicted by a grand jury in New York.
Trump, we with you.
Last night, his supporters gathered in front of his Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. New York prosecutors have been investigating the alleged payment of hush money to an adult film star prior to his election in 2016. The payment was legal, but Trump allegedly recorded it as a business expense, which is illegal in New York. Mr. Trump denies wrongdoing. The Manhattan investigation is one of several legal challenges against the former president. And back here, holiday seekers could see their Easter plans scuppered after last-ditch talks to halt security guard strikes at Heathrow Airport failed. More than 1,400 Unite members will walk out from Terminal 5 for 10 days from today. The airport says it's drafting in 1,000 extra staff to help passengers. A review into culture at England's fire and rescue services has found that racist, sexist and homophobic comments have been dismissed as banter. The damning report says behaviours that have gone unchallenged include humiliating new recruits, acting out rape and expecting women to make tea. His Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services says the deeply troubling findings at all 44 services in England are shocking and appalling. Aristocrat Constance Martin and convicted sex offender Mark Gordon are due to stand trial in January next year over the death of their baby. The runaway couple from West Sussex, who have been charged with gross negligence manslaughter, appeared in court today. The court heard earlier this month that the couple had hidden the remains of their baby girl called Victoria inside an allotment shed during a widespread police investigation into the couple's disappearance. Around 1.7 million workers are set to benefit from a national minimum wage increase from tomorrow. Workers aged 23 and over will now get a 92p rise, taking the minimum wage to £10.42 an hour. Think tank The Resolution Foundation has called it the biggest annual cash rise in the 24-year history of the minimum wage. MP Kevin Hollinrake says it'll benefit both workers and employers.
9.7% increase, very substantial increase, £10.42 per hour minimum wage, really massive progress we've made in this area, one of the highest minimum wage rates in Europe, really good for workers and good for attracting more people back into the workplace, so good for employers too.
And Oscar Pistorius is up for parole after serving half of his sentence for killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. The South African former Paralympian was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months for shooting Ms. Steenkamp at his home on Valentine's Day in 2013. He was convicted of culpable homicide in 2014. That was then overturned and changed to murder. If granted parole, Pistorius, now 36 years old, could be released within a matter of days. The Steenkamp family says he doesn't deserve to be released.
They don't feel that he should be released. They feel that he has shown no remorse. He's not rehabilitated, because if he had been, he would have come clean and told the true story of what happened that night. The Supreme Court of Appeal found that there were inconsistencies in his testimony. He could have clarified it. He did not testify in mitigation when he was afforded the opportunity to do so.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So the biggest trade deal since Brexit, or the government bigging up trade deals we've already had in place with Pacific countries? Well, the UK has been accepted into the Indo-Pacific Trade Group. The Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, saying the entry to the snappily entitled, wait for it, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership is about the potential for growth tomorrow. But critics point out that the potential growth may amount to just 0.08% of GDP, tiny amounts. We're joined now in the studio by our political reporter Olivia Utley. And Olivia, when they've been running the slide rule over this, they also point out the Office for Budget Responsibility, suggesting Brexit will be reducing economic growth by about 4% in the long term. So what benefit will there be with this new deal?
Yeah, so in purely numerical terms, obviously, this deal doesn't sound like it means a huge amount. We already have trade deals with 9 out of the 11 countries in the trade bloc. The only ones we don't have deals with are Malaysia and Brunei, which aren't huge global economies.
Yeah, I think it's palm oil that they're looking at from Malaysia, for instance, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
And there are human rights concerns with Brunei
absolutely.
as well. The sort of headline stats don't sound particularly impressive. That said, there is a good argument, Jeremy Hunt made it in the bulletins there, that this is a growing economy. These countries are going to be much more important by the end of the decade than they are now. So around 50% of the world's middle class will be in these 11 countries. So the government's argument is that we are investing in these partnerships for the future. There are other soft power benefits as well. So, for example, China has wanted to become part of this trade partnership and has not been allowed in. But we know that China does have quite a lot of influence in that region. And the hope is that having Britain in that region will have an eye over what's going on with China and perhaps be able to mitigate against some of China's influence.
We saw the AUKUS military pacts with Australia and the United States and the UK. One wonders if perhaps behind the scenes they see this as important in terms of that geopolitical weapon, if you like, to balance the trade power with China. And I mean, it's interesting that Pat McFadden, the Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury, giving it a cautious welcome. So perhaps they're looking at a longer-term benefit than what we might see on the balance books immediately.
Definitely. So we're hearing ministers talk about the Indo-Pacific tilt, Britain tilting to this region. And the hope is that eventually this region will be, this trade bloc could be far more influential than the EU. So once Britain is part of this bloc, it will account for 15% of the world's GDP. Well, that's actually slightly higher than the EU was last year. So already we're seeing this region gaining hugely in significance. And when Britain is a part of it, that could go up again. Yeah. And also, you've got the US obviously was keen to join the forerunner of this trading partnership under Barack Obama. That was scrapped under Donald Trump, and now the Democrats don't want to touch it because they think it's what lost Hillary Clinton the election. But there is a big movement in America that would like to see America join this. And obviously, Britain is looking for a trade deal with the US, and this could end up smoothing the path to that trade deal.
Yeah.
So in numeric terms, it might not sound like very much, but in terms of a statement of intent of Britain's place on the global stage and all sorts of soft power concerns, there are big benefits.
And looking at the hard commodities, if you like, as well as the soft diplomacy, cars, cheese, chocolate, whiskey and gin. Well, we make plenty of whiskey and gin, for instance, but we don't make that many cars anymore. So, you know, what will we be exporting?
Well, yeah, so we're going to have, it's going to be, the deal basically means that we will have 99% of exports from the UK will be tariff-free. Yes, our car manufacturing industry is in trouble, and probably in more trouble after yesterday's announcement of the green energy package, because while the EU has softened its regulations around diesel and petrol, the UK has kept them pretty stringent. So we will now be competing against EU car manufacturers with much looser regulations. So that will be tricky. So whiskey and cheese it is.
Yeah, or gin and cheese. But I mean, in terms of the tariffs, this is the interesting approach as well. This is effectively a free trade zone as such, isn't it, that they've established?
Yes, it is a free trade zone, and it's very interesting because it's essentially a free trade zone very similar to the EU, but ostensibly anyway, without any of the politics. So there's no court, there's no sort of politicised element of it whatsoever.
Yeah. So you don't have commissioners knocking on your door if you're not sort of signing the right paperwork at some stage.
Exactly. Yeah. It's essentially the relationship which Britain wanted to have with the EU, but was told was impossible in David Cameron's day. So it is good news, and it's interesting from a global perspective that these trade partnerships are starting up and gaining influence and traction, when the EU's argument was that it was only possible with more political harmony.
Yeah.
It'll be fascinating to see where it goes.
Indeed, although obviously we reflect the EU still our main trading partner, of course, despite all these agreements. Olivia, thank you for that, but let's actually see what you think of this. We've been out with our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, to speak to people in Birmingham and get their thoughts on this.
Absolutely not. Still cost of living is going up, energy price going up, rates going up. You know, if this trade deal can bring any of those down and make everyday costs go down, then be more than happy, but don't feel that way.
Definitely not. 0.08% is absolutely nothing. It make no difference at all.
No. I don't feel better off. Brexit is a very bad thing for the UK, and I think it's better to be with your neighbours rather than somebody far away. I don't think it's a good idea.
Oh, thumbs down in Birmingham, but let's get some more views now, indeed from the Director of Policy at Logistics UK, Kate Jennings, who's joining us. Kate, thanks for your time. Is it the biggest trade deal since Brexit, or is it being bigged up, as we said, by Kemi Badenoch?
Well, I think we should congratulate the negotiators on reaching this deal, because these deals are not easy, and I understand things like the Windsor framework in Northern Ireland, was necessary before they could get this far. I mean, I would absolutely agree. This is a huge potential future market. So although initial benefits may be moderate, we shouldn't neglect the fact that trade underpins the economy. I mean, for us, our members as Logistics UK, they ship goods by road, rail, air and sea. We also include, the retailers and the manufacturers. That represents 8%, more than 8% of all the jobs in the UK, and £148 billion worth of GVA. So trade, free trade is good and supports sort of jobs and prosperity. I can say more about this specific deal if that's helpful.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we've got trade deals with 9 of the 11 countries already. So where does this take us? I mean, it's an extra 2, which is, as we're just discussing with Olivia, Brunei, Malaysia. I mean, it's not exactly pan-global, is it?
No, but it's an important market, and Malaysia is new, so that zero tariffs for Malaysia will be useful. I think also it's about the future, isn't it? We know that China and Taiwan and Korea are all interested in joining this partnership. As your colleague said earlier, the US actually were in at the beginning of this negotiation. It's possible that they will come back into this partnership. So to be part of it and to be able to influence, where you go from here, I think is really useful. For my members as well, some of the customs simplification that is planned and digitising
What are we going to be trading with them? As again, I was just discussing with Olivia, we've got plenty of gin, plenty of whiskey and a bit of chocolate that we can send their way. But we don't make anything anymore in terms of mass production. We don't make cars to that extent.
I mean, I think this is a wider discussion, isn't it? Those things you've named there are some of the main areas where we are expecting benefits. It will make it easier for cars to be exported, but also for car parts to be exported and then maybe assembled in the region within the free trade area. So it will facilitate trade. And it might take time to see those benefits, but we shouldn't underestimate the potential there.
OK, quick reaction then to, we've had the latest figures out from the ONS in terms of the state of the economy. Recession avoided. So the UK economy is still proving pretty resilient, as Jeremy Hunt's reflected.
Yes, let's hope. I think that's really important. It's interesting, within logistics, you often see what's happening first. And, yes, I think trade has slowed down a bit. But if we can stay out of recession, then that's good for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah. Kate Jennings, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction. And, of course, we'll continue to see what comes through on the political sphere as well as the economic sphere in terms of this. Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, don't forget to let us know your view as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, let's turn to the latest poll that you've been answering the question of Sir Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak, addressing crime, antisocial behaviour, 28% saying the Labour leader, just 16% saying Rishi Sunak. However, a significant 45% say they just don't know. In the poll, 12% of the public saying MPs should be allowed to have second jobs, 60% saying no, banned altogether from having them. And in the latest voting intentions, Labour on 42%, Tories still trailing on 24%. That would mean, if we went to the polls today, a landslide result for Labour. Let's get more with Catherine, who's joining us in the studio. Much change in the way people are thinking about things?
Well, certainly not in voting intention. I mean, it's marginally better for the Conservatives. They've gone up to 24 from 22 a week ago.
So a little bit of a bump, yeah.
And, I mean, there have been polls in the last week or so that have put Conservatives and Labour within 10 points of each other. So there might be a beginning of a closing, but still the Tories are a long, long, long way off. But they're hopeful that's going to change if and when Rishi Sunak can deliver on these 5 priorities.
Yeah.
But I think, interesting, the crime and antisocial behaviour results from this poll. First of all, a lot of support for things like on-the-spot fines for graffiti, currently about £150. Only 8% of people think that's too harsh. 37% think not harsh enough. So certainly scope for the government to be tougher on these things. But the government launched their antisocial behaviour strategy this week to much fanfare. They might have expected a bit of a bump from that. But according to the poll, 28% of people think Labour under Keir Starmer would be better at managing crime and antisocial behaviour, and only 16% for the Conservatives.
Yeah. And a significant 45% saying they just don't know. So maybe all the sort of policy research they did, this is a touchstone with the public, it seems to have missed the target.
Well, but there's potential there, isn't there, for both parties? If nearly half of people don't know who's best,
get them on your side.
There is an opportunity. And Keir Starmer has made it one of Labour's 5 missions, make Britain's streets safe, where Rishi Sunak hasn't done that, despite all the chat about antisocial behaviour crackdown. But I think the fact that more people trust Labour is simply not what Labour are saying or doing, simply the fact that the Conservatives have been in government for 13 years and crime in England and Wales, recorded crime, is an all-time high to last summer, and conviction rates, only 5.6% of offences leading to court action. That's down from 16% like 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. Now, you were in Swindon yesterday for the launch of the Labour local election campaign, and the others have been launched. I mean, how much, and what does this tell us in terms of people identifying with the party leaders rather than the policies? Will it be a sort of presidential type election when we get to the general election?
Well, certainly Rishi Sunak does not have the star power that Boris Johnson did, although, of course, Boris Johnson's star power arguably was seriously
The competent chief executive he's been described
But
as.
he has got that in that people do see him. Sure, he's very rich and that will hurt him with some voters, but people do recognise that he works very hard, he doesn't drink, he's trying, he's competent, and it might be that that is appealing to a lot of people. But by the same token, Keir Starmer is also in a similar mode, not terribly exciting.
A bit dull, some people describe it. But we were being told boring is good in terms of politics.
Well,
after
all the drama of the psychodrama of Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss, I think there will certainly be an appeal and a desire for just competent government, people getting on with delivering policies to help people. But certainly Keir Starmer isn't Tony Blair either. So there isn't the sort of swell of...
So will one of the key elements that everyone will be looking at now in these local elections coming up this month or so in May, the turnout, how many people will be engaging with the whole process of politics, or is it just a turn-off after what they've all been through?
Well, it seems that a lot of people are really dissatisfied with all the main parties, aren't they?
Broken Britain, that phrase that keeps coming up. Yeah.
Fed up with the Conservatives, what's happened over the last year, specifically cost of living crisis, etc., but not excited, not inspired by Labour. And Labour, although they're doing very well in the polls, they're going to have to be pinned down on what they would actually do, and they're still being quite vague.
Tax policy, corporation tax, which way is it going to go with them and so on,
Yeah, they're still being quite vague, but the last time we had these particular set of local elections was 2019, in the middle of all the Brexit sort of stalemate with Theresa May, and the Conservatives did very badly then. So they're expecting to do badly again. They think they might lose up to 1,000 seats, but it will be interesting. They might not do as they're expecting it to be horrendous, but possibly it won't be quite as horrendous. We'll find out in about a couple of months.
Not quite as horrendous. There we are. That's the best we can hope for.
Bar,
yeah, thank you very much indeed. And colour coordinated today. So there we are. We chose the right things, didn't we? Thank you very much. Coming up in a moment, the latest on Donald Trump, the first former president to face criminal charges. We'll be updating you with what's happening on the streets of Florida and New York, and also coming up the latest on the final day of the royal state visit to Hamburg today. We'll be there live for you shortly.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's update you on the third and final day of the royal state visit to Germany with the King and Queen Consort in Hamburg today. Very significant visit because, of course, this was the city destroyed by Allied bombing in 1943. The King and Queen Consort have been earlier at the church that was destroyed by that bombing, but now heading towards City Hall, where the King will sign the Golden Book, and the significance being, of course, that his late Queen Elizabeth II had signed that, and I think as Prince Charles too, he signed it back in 1987. Cameron Walker, our royal reporter, is there for us, and it's another moment of history in terms of this connection with the past, particularly going back, as we were saying earlier, at the church, reflecting on World War II.
Yes, exactly, Mark. That Golden Book, which the King will sign here at City Hall, was signed by Queen Elizabeth II in 1965 when she was here on a state visit. And you're right, just before this engagement, the King and Queen Consort first went to the Kindertransport Memorial just outside the train station here, having arrived from Berlin this morning, commemorating the 10,000 or so children who were transported from Germany to the UK to escape the Nazis in 1938. And then the two of them went to a memorial service, really, a very short memorial service at St. Nikolai Church in Hamburg, which is now essentially a ruin because it was bombed by the Allies in 1943. It's the 80th anniversary of that bombing raid this year. The King and the President of Germany both laid wreaths at that. But on your screens now, I believe you should be seeing the King greeting the hundreds of people who have turned out here outside of Hamburg City Hall. It has been raining all morning. There have been very determined people here, but luckily the rain has started to ease off as the King and Queen Consort have arrived here. So they are expected to spend some time trying to meet as many local Germans, local people from Hamburg as possible. There are people with Union flags, for those listening on radio, German flags as well, welcome banners for His Majesty the King and Queen Consort. They're going to receive a formal welcome by the First Mayor of Hamburg. While at the City Hall, it's, of course, the seat of Hamburg's government, and they will have the opportunity, as I mentioned, to sign the Golden Book in the Emperor's Hall. And the German president is also expected to be here as well, First Mayor of Hamburg, his wife too. And it's basically, the original City Hall was destroyed by a devastating fire in 1842. And it has 647 rooms and stands on over 4,000 oak piles. And as I said, Her late Majesty visited in 1965. So perhaps this is a full circle in terms of diplomatic relations between Germany and the United Kingdom. Of course, it is the government who decides where the King is sent on a state visit, and perhaps they thought it was best to strengthen relations between Germany and the United Kingdom.
Indeed, but one reflects, Cameron, that the late Queen Elizabeth would not have been shaking hands in the way that the King is now and exchanging words. I mean, it's like a rock star reception, one reflects, in terms of the spread of ages here, and we've got flowers being presented, but everyone taking time to have a word and shaking hands. That's going to be a very sore wrist by the end of this, but it's an indication about the warmth with which the royal couple have been greeted here.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. For the last 2 days, the King and Queen consorts have been on German front pages here. The whole state visit seems to have gone down remarkably well, really. It's that power of soft diplomacy in action that the royal family has. Their global fame, their global presence allows them to shine a light on causes close to their heart, yes, but also is really a trump card in the UK government's arsenal in terms of soft diplomatic relations. But also, I think a lot of people were concerned that when Her Majesty the Queen passed away, that the UK royal family would not have this kind of global appeal and global presence. But I think the proof's in the pudding here in Hamburg, and certainly in Germany during that first ceremonial welcome at the Brandenburg Gate a few days ago. The German people seem to love the King and Queen consorts and the UK royal family, prepared to stand hours in the rain just to catch a glimpse of them.
And extraordinary when one thinks back, this was a city effectively destroyed by Allied bombing in 1943 in Operation Gomorrah, the biggest tonnage, I think, of any German city. And as we said, the church earlier, where they signed that book of remembrance, the centre of that awful time, of course. And now, clearly looking at these pictures, history has just turned full circle.
Absolutely, Mark. It was 80 years ago in 1943, or it will be this summer, that the Allies bombed Hamburg, and it essentially flattened the city centre. But the tall church steeple of St Nikolai Church, where the King and Queen consorts were, survived. It was very similar to what happened in Coventry, the Midlands city in the UK, where that was essentially flattened in 1940 during the German bombing campaign there. So it was essentially the Hamburg bombing in 1943 was a retaliation of that. But you're right, it is the reconciliation which King Charles talks about. You can hear the crowds cheering now. Where is he? He's there, not very far from me. Yes, it's essentially this reconciliation, which is a theme the King touched on during his speech at the German Bundestag yesterday. The German Parliament's becoming the first British sovereign to address German politicians here, and he spoke about that reconciliation of our two countries over the last 50, 60 years or so, and it is complete full circle. Of course, there is a war in Ukraine still going on, the Russian invasion. There were a number of engagements yesterday involving military personnel as well as Ukrainian refugees. I can just see the King now heading into the Hamburg City Hall. He is, of course, going to be signing... He's, of course, going to be signing that golden book as his mother did in 1965, Queen Elizabeth II. And we are perhaps expecting the King and Queen consorts to make a balcony appearance here at Hamburg's City Hall to wave to the crowds a little bit later on. It's not meant to be that long an engagement, so as soon as we have any more details, I don't know if you've got footage inside, but we'll bring that straight to you.
Excellent. Cameron, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, back to you then, Hamburg, as that state visit continues, the third and final day. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up here on GB News Live, more on Donald Trump, the former president, but maybe now a felon as well. Police preparing for what could be a day of protest after news emerging he is to face criminal charges. First, though, let's get an update on all the other headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's 12:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After nearly 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whiskey. It's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are due to stand trial in January next year over the death of a baby girl. The runaway pair from West Sussex have been charged with gross negligence manslaughter. The couple appeared in court earlier. They didn't enter pleas and have been remanded in custody. They've also been charged with concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. Former England cricket captain Michael Vaughan has been cleared of using racist language towards Azim Rafiq and 3 other former Yorkshire teammates. The Cricket Discipline Commission found significant inconsistencies in how witnesses recalled the alleged words used in 2009. The panel said it wasn't satisfied on the balance of probabilities that they were said by Vaughan at the time and in the specific circumstances alleged. And Oscar Pistorius is up for parole after serving half of his sentence for killing his girlfriend Reva Steenkamp. The South African former Paralympian was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months for shooting Ms Steenkamp at his home on Valentine's Day in 2013. He was convicted of culpable homicide in 2014. That was then overturned and changed to murder. If granted parole, Pistorius, now 36, could be released within a matter of days. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now let's take you to the United States, where Donald Trump's the first former US president to face criminal charges because a grand jury in New York has now voted to indict him over alleged offences related to so-called hush money paid to a former porn star, Stormy Daniels. Now, the Republicans are calling the indictment an outrage and a witch hunt. Meanwhile, Democrats say no one is above the law. These are the scenes in New York. Big police presence because the fear is that there could be protests there and perhaps at Mar-a-Lago down in Florida, of course, at the Trump compound. Well, joining us now in the studio to explore this further, spokesperson for Republicans overseas, Jennifer Ewing. Jennifer, thanks for joining us. Pretty quiet there at the moment. That may change a little later, both in New York and Florida, where we saw some of his supporters out last night. But just to explain to people about what's happening in the legal process, this is without precedent, isn't it? But the allegation as to so-called hush money, that itself could be legal, but he recorded it as a business expense, and that's where the district attorney in New York is picking him up.
Exactly right, and let's not forget that the district attorney's predecessor did not go forward with this,
even though they knew about this.
Yes, this is 7 years old, right? So I mean, statute of limitations. So 7 years old, and also the feds decided not to go forward with this either. So I think what we have here, and of course the indictment has not been unsealed, right? So we don't know the exact charges and we don't know the exact evidence, but we know the basic theme that it's about. So one, I mean, look, we're waiting for protests. It's a huge distraction from bigger issues, whether it's a banking crisis or, you know, some of our people in the, Asia and the Middle East, making alliances with each other against the U.S. So huge distraction. Number two,
And I was just going to say that the question in terms of his position politically, most Americans believe, or a majority believe, that criminal charges should disqualify him from running for president in the 2024 runoff. But there's no actual legal precedent on that. Am I right in saying
that's correct? This has never happened before, and it's very much a case of, you know, they've gone after President Trump. I mean, there's 2 failed impeachments. There is the Russia hoax, there was the Mar-a-Lago, everything. So this is just another thing that they're going after him for. I think the reason is, and it's actually really, really smart, is that they know, you look at these protests, the Trump supporters are going to rally around him, and even people who are not Trump supporters. Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer, and he's come out and said, hey, I don't like Trump, but I want my chance to vote against him. This is wrong. It's a weaponization of the criminal justice system, and it's wrong.
There's even a suggestion that actually Trump would be quite pleased to be put in handcuffs on Tuesday and the mugshot and the fingerprints, whatever, because he sees that as a political play, then playing the victim, if you like.
100%, and that will happen, and I believe that's what the Democrats want. They want Biden to run against Trump in 2024. They're nervous about DeSantis, right? There's a few reasons why.
Who's the governor of Florida?
The governor of Florida, exactly.
Is a Republican poster boy, one might say. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I think especially after the midterms, where a lot of, Trump's people didn't do that well. DeSantis, I mean, look at it. He just swept Florida. He's done a fantastic job. On top of that, people want DeSantis because he's less divisive and he can run 2 terms. Trump's already had 1 term, so he can't run another term. So the Biden administration, they want people angry, backing Trump, and then they elevate him. Then Trump is the person who wins.
So the argument from your point of view is that actually the Biden White House would quite like to see Trump coming up against him for this next presidential race?
I believe so.
Really?
I absolutely think so. They don't want to run against DeSantis. And Trump, look, we had 4 years of peace and prosperity. There's a lot to be said for that. But for a multitude of reasons that I'm sure we don't need to go into, a lot of Republicans did not vote for him last time. They plugged their nose, they voted for Biden thinking he was a centrist. And look what we got,
However, will that calculation, if that's the right word, change if he is actually arraigned and criminal charges are put to him? Because clearly what is being alleged is that this is not a federal misdemeanor, but in terms of state law in New York, you should not or cannot falsify business accounts, which is the argument that this money was channeled through a business account.
Absolutely. And, you know, like I said, the indictment is still sealed, so we don't know the exact charges. Perhaps Alvin Bragg comes out on Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
We think it'll be Tuesday, with a bunch of charges that we're not prepared for that, you know, shocks everyone. I doubt it very much.
Okay.
But it's a distraction away from a failed Biden administration. It's a weaponization of the criminal justice system, which should scare everyone, because I think all of these people, perhaps with Trump deranged syndrome, that are cheering this on, you know, what happens a couple years ago when it switches and it goes to one of their people?
This was the question I was then going to ask you finally, after what we saw on Capitol Hill. What is the danger that Trump basically miscalculates and will lose in terms of the US electoral support if we see violent scenes on the streets of New York or down in Florida?
Well, I mean, violent scenes are never a good thing, right? But we do know with January 6th, especially some of the things that Kevin McCarthy has released, and I know that's been on the news in the US, that, you know, Trump did come out and try to...
Jennifer, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Apologies for interrupting, but we're going to go back to Hamburg because we have the signing of the so-called Golden Book at the town hall in Hamburg. There we are. And will the pen work once again? It certainly did a day or two ago in Berlin, and yes, that appears to be working. No inky fingers for the King. We remember, of course, the problems that he had with the fountain pen in St James's Palace, passing that on to the Queen Consort. But this was signed by Charles as Prince Charles, I think I can say back in 1997, I think it was. 87, I beg your pardon, and by Her late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth in 1965 when she visited Hamburg City Hall. There is the said Golden Book, a rather magnificent tome, and I don't know if they can get it open for the King to peruse. Perhaps they'll be showing the King the previous documents signed by both himself and the Queen. A bit of history there, and as we were reflecting earlier, this is a very significant visit to Hamburg because we had the attendance at the church, St Nikolai Church, which was used by Allied bombers, no less, as a navigation aid when they were coming in 1943 to literally flatten the city. So this is very much an act of reconciliation today with the royal couple making this visit. Cameron, our royal reporter, is there. Cameron, we can just see them perusing that Golden Book, and we're reflecting again. They will have thoughts back to 1965 and 1987.
Absolutely. Queen Elizabeth II here in 1965. Charles, when he was Prince of Wales, here in 1987. Before they were signed to the book, there was a brief balcony appearance, actually, with the King, Queen Consort and President of Germany and his wife as well. The crowd went wild, and I didn't quite appreciate from my position just how many people have turned up. There must be thousands of people here. The entire square is full of royal fans from Germany. In the crowd, and we're here because they want to really show their appreciation to King Charles, and a few of them got to actually meet His Majesty as well. Obviously German royal fans as well, who have been queuing for hours in the rain, just hoping to catch a glimpse of him, and the Queen Consort, hoping to speak to him. Of course, many got the opportunity to do so if they were at the front of the queue. It's not long now, as you can probably see. There's police motorbikes and the motorcade behind me for the King until the King and Queen Consort depart City Hall, of course the seat of Hamburg's government. The two of them are going to split off. The King's going to do an engagement to do with green energy. He's going to be taking a boat trip, as we understand it. The Queen Consort's going to be off to a school to talk about literacy and read to school children too. But clearly before they came to City Hall, it was all about reconciliation with the engagement at St Nikolai Church, that's the shell of a church really that was bombed by the Allies during World War II in 1943, the 80th anniversary of that. The King and the President of Germany both laid wreaths commemorating those who have lost their lives. Yeah. And there was a separate engagement at the Kindertransport as well. So it seems to be very successful here in Hamburg. It has almost stopped raining, not quite, but it's definitely lighter than it was. But the people here in Hamburg are true royal fans.
Indeed. We're just seeing, I think, youngster just put on either mum or dad's shoulders there, literally next to the Bentley, the Royal Limousine, to get a shot which they'll remember for years ahead. We've just seen a close-up to the signatures in that golden book. I think I'm not giving state secrets away. Well, I can tell you that in the Queen Consort's visit later, they'll be reading the Gruffalo, a favourite, of course, of many young children. I hadn't realised, actually, myself, that the illustrator, Axel Scheffler, from Hamburg, moved to England to study illustration at the Bath Academy of Art. And then, of course, with that wonderful furry creature, the Gruffalo, worldwide bestseller. So this will be quite a moment for the kids.
Yes, indeed. Everything seems to have a German theme today. The brooch that the Queen Consort is wearing was actually Queen Victoria's back in the day and was given to her on her wedding day by her husband, Prince Albert, who, of course, was German. So another German theme there. The Queen Consort expected to read the Gruffalo at that school, as you were saying. She's going to be reading to the children in English, but as I understand it, the German president's wife is also going to be accompanying the Queen Consort to the school and will be reading to them in German, because the Queen Consort really champions literacy. It's one of her main passions, and she wants as many children as possible to
Cameron, I'm just
enjoy
going to
reading, learning
interrupt
to
you.
read
They're just
early on
giving
in
us
life,
a close-up
really
shot of the
prospects.
signatures
So
of
we're
Queen
just waiting.
Elizabeth and Prince Philip when they signed that book in 1965, which I think obviously would have been on show there to King Charles.
I'm so sorry, Mark. I think I can't quite hear you. I think a button might have been pressed in the gallery or something, so you're really faint.
Yeah, I was just saying, we just had a close-up shot. The cameraman inside the town hall there was giving us a close-up of the page signed by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip back in 1965, which we assume would have been shown to the King when he was signing his page.
Yes, it certainly would be. Of course, the royal family's dynasty, as you like, goes on for 1,000 years, and the German relation with the United Kingdom, the positive relationship, has been going on for a long time. So I think it just shows the history of the relationship between Britain and Germany. It's a theme, really, that the King touched on during his speech in the Bundestag yesterday. Of course, he became the first British sovereign to address German politicians in the German Parliament, and he teased to this reconciliation, the reconciliation engagements which we have seen today in Hamburg, first at the Kindertransport Memorial, then at St. Nikolai Church. But the whole point of a state visit is, of course, to strengthen relations between two nations, and it would have been the British government's advice that Buckingham Palace took when they were deciding where to send the King and Queen Consort on their first state visit. Of course, also the first foreign visit that the King has done since ascending to the throne, and it seems appropriate, perhaps, for the British government to send the King and Queen Consorts to a European nation first, rather than a Commonwealth nation, which is what Queen Elizabeth II did in 1953 following her coronation. So those strengthening of relationships seems to be going down pretty well here, because they're on the front page of newspapers here in Germany. They were on the front pages of some of Britain's newspapers a couple of days ago following that state banquet. So the reception has really gone down well. So I think the French government, at least, will be not too pleased that they've had to postpone and we haven't been getting this good a coverage. But for Germany, it's been a success.
Yeah, we're just going to stay with these pictures because we've seen some of the officials, press and security and so on coming out the front door of the town hall. So we expect the King and Queen Consort to emerge fairly shortly. And from what you've been saying, Cameron, we're expecting quite a loud cheer on that particular occasion.
Yes, I think we are. The entire square here outside Hamburg City Hall is full of people. There must be thousands here. Despite the rain, they clearly feel like they want to see the King and Queen Consort. Of course, they both have global appeal, global fame. It is that power of soft diplomacy in action. It really is a trump card that the British government can use to shore up relations and improve relations between different countries. And they are prepared to wait here in the rain to see the King and Queen Consort. And I think the reception here for the King and Queen will be most welcome, because we're never quite sure at a change of reign what the reception is going to be like for a new monarch.
Yes.
The king is still very early on in his reign. It's not yet been a year. He's not even been crowned yet. And yet, clearly, the appetite here in Europe, post-Brexit, is still one of affection to the British monarchy. And I think that's going to be very welcome to the British government.
And Cameron, have you had any sort of feedback from the royal officials and those within the royal party about their reaction to, I think the bodyguards are just coming out now, so this is going to be imminent. They must be pretty pleased with the way this has all gone.
Oh, yeah, I think they certainly are, Mark. I mean, when France very, last minute had to ask Buckingham Palace to postpone the French part of this state visit due to those protests with the pension reforms, that some of which turned violent. I think Buckingham Palace, it creates a bit of a headache for them logistically and also PR-wise as well. But from my understanding, I think everyone is pretty pleased as to just how well the state visit to Germany has been perceived so far, both in the British press and the German press. As I mentioned, it's on a number of the front pages here in Germany this morning. A picture of the king stood in the German parliament, the Bundestag, becoming the first British monarch to address the German parliament. And clearly the ordinary German citizens here feel the same, that it has gone incredibly well for them. And many of them want to catch a glimpse of them, because the King and Queen Consort don't come to Germany very often. The King and Queen Consort, I'm told, is just emerging from the building. They will be going into their state car here. Yes, just walking the red carpet, the King and Queen Consort with an umbrella in the rain. A quick wave to the crowd. Oh no, he's actually going over to the crowds to greet two ladies who look like they're dressed up as Mary Poppins, actually. Yes, the King and Queen Consorts, they're clearly wanting to meet as many local residents as possible here, just going on behind me despite the rain here. It looks like they're spending a lot longer here than they were scheduled to do so, so that might cause a little bit of logistical problems later on, but clearly the King finds it important, sees it as an important opportunity to meet as many local German people as possible, because the King meets thousands of people every day on this kind of state visit, or hundreds at least, I should say. But this is probably the only time that the German citizens really are going to physically have the chance to meet the King in person.
And Cameron,
British
I think I'm right in saying
have
that
more opportunity.
Yeah, the King is literally behind you, behind that phalanx of police motorbikes there. I don't know if you can actually see him, because we saw the President shaking hands as well, and James Cleverly there, the Foreign Secretary, with a huge smile on his face.
Yes, I think the Foreign Secretary probably seems pretty pleased with himself, because it would have been some of his advice which allowed this state visit to take place. Of course, it is custom for the most senior foreign minister to accompany the king or the monarch on a state visit abroad. He attended the state banquet in Berlin at the Bellevue Palace, which is the official residence of the German president here in Germany. So James Cleverly was there as well. Clearly, the King and Queen Consort are still continuing to greet crowds here, along with the German president and the president's wife. All four of them were on the balcony here at City Hall just a few moments ago before you came to be, Mark, basically waving to the crowds, because only the people at the very front clearly are going to get a decent view of the King and Queen Consorts, but the crowds are thousands. There's thousands of people in the crowds. The entire square here is full. Clearly the King and Queen Consort feel the need to try and meet as many locals as possible. We know that the King is a very personable monarch. He's not shy or afraid to meet, strangers, the local people. We had a few egg incidents, didn't we, in the United Kingdom when the King was meeting members of the public, but that did not deter him from carrying on at the next engagements to meet members of the public. And I think that is what we're seeing here. He wants to give as many people as possible a moment of their time, because, a second to him is a lifetime of memory for an ordinary German citizen.
And good to see a Welsh flag flying there as well in the background, even though, of course, he's no longer technically the Prince of Wales, but clearly the connection still being made there by a Welsh person perhaps in that crowd, as well as, of course, the Union flag being flown by all those people greeting the King. The royal standard there on top of the Bentley. And as you said, a huge turnout there in the square outside the town hall. And Cameron, in terms of this visit, the third and final day, but still much to actually fill out. It must have been a pretty packed diary, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, you mentioned the Welsh flags and Union flags. There's also a Scottish flag here and many Ukraine flags as well, because some Ukrainian refugees who I spoke to earlier have come to, who now live in Hamburg, have come to pay their respects and thank King Charles for all his work and support for Ukrainian refugees and them defending their territory. Yes, in terms of engagements going on later today, the King and Queen Consort are expected to split off now, actually. The King will be visiting, will be going on a boat. The King and Queen Consort just leaving now, actually, but the King is heading on a boat to learn about green energy and be looking at kind of an electro-generating initiative for Hamburg. It's all about green energy and generating energy, something that the King is clearly very interested in. The King is just leaving now Hamburg City Hall, so he's going to be off to be getting on a boat. The Queen Consort, meanwhile, will be heading to a school with the German president's wife to be read the Gruffalo, as we were mentioning earlier, Mark. She is very keen to champion children's literacy and clearly takes every opportunity to do that, whichever country she's in. And then the two of them going to meet up again for the final engagement of this 3-day state visit for a big reception here in Hamburg. 1,000 people, I'm told, are invited, involving youth groups, local civil organisations here in Hamburg as well. Just kind of a celebration of German and British cultures here. A diplomatic reception is probably a way to describe it. That strengthening of relations. And if they can get through those 3 engagements as successfully as they have done for the last couple of days, then I think, on the whole, this entire 3-day state visit, the first of King Charles's reign, the first the first visit abroad for King Charles in his new role as king, will go down as a pretty big success. And I think that gives him a big boost ahead of his coronation, which is in less than 6 weeks' time, where again the global spotlights will be on him and his Queen Consort.
Updating us there in the rain in Hamburg, which has not deterred those crowds. As we said, we've seen the flags flying there and the cheers. A Welsh flag, a Scottish saltire, the Union flag, and, of course, Ukrainian flags as well, reflecting on a very historic occasion there, that signing of the Golden Book and, indeed, the act of remembrance earlier at the St. Nikolai Church in Hamburg, which was destroyed, of course, by Allied bombing in 1943. Back to Germany for the rest of that state visit as it continues, of course, on this last day. Let's update you on all the other headlines now, just past 1 o'clock, and Rhiannon's waiting for us.
I am indeed, Mark. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. 2 minutes past 1, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After nearly 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whisky. It's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth.
The significance of joining the Pacific Trade Bloc is that this is one of the fastest growing areas in the world. Around half of the world's middle-class consumers will be in this block of countries by the end of the decade. It's a massive opportunity for British exporters, and combined with the very attractive business taxes that we introduced in the budget, a £9 billion cut in corporation tax, that will mean that the UK economy has very big long-term growth opportunities.
Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to face criminal charges after he was indicted by a grand jury in New York.
Trump, we with you.
Last night, his supporters gathered in front of his Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. New York prosecutors have been investigating the alleged payment of hush money to an adult film star prior to his election in 2016. The payment was legal, but Trump allegedly recorded it as a business expense, which is illegal in New York. Mr. Trump denies wrongdoing. The Manhattan investigation is one of several legal challenges against the former president. Oscar Pistorius is up for parole after serving half of his sentence for killing his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp. The South African former Paralympian was sentenced to 13 years and 5 months for shooting Ms. Steenkamp at his home on Valentine's Day in 2013. He was convicted of culpable homicide in 2014. That was then overturned and changed to murder. If granted parole, Pistorius, now aged 36, could be released within a matter of days. The Steenkamp family says he doesn't deserve to get out of jail.
They don't feel that he should be released. They feel that he has shown no remorse. He's not rehabilitated, because if he had been, he would have come clean and told the true story of what happened that night. The Supreme Court of Appeal found that there were inconsistencies in his testimony. He could have clarified it. He did not testify in mitigation when he was afforded the opportunity to do so.
Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are due to stand trial in January next year over the death of their baby girl. The runaway couple from West Sussex, who've been charged with gross negligence manslaughter, appeared in court today. A court heard earlier this month the couple hid the remains of the baby girl inside an allotment shed during a widespread police investigation into the couple's disappearance. 2 teenagers have been arrested in connection with the death of an elderly woman in Suffolk. Officers were called to a house in Pakefield at 2 p.m. on Saturday after reports 82-year-old Joy Middleditch had been found lying on the floor following a robbery. 2 boys, aged 15 and 14, both from the Lowestoft area, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. A review into culture at England's Fire and Rescue Services has found that racist, sexist and homophobic comments have been dismissed as banter. The damning report says behaviours that have gone unchallenged include humiliating new recruits, acting out rape and expecting women to make tea. His Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services says the deeply troubling findings at all 44 services in England are both shocking and appalling. Holiday seekers could see their Easter plans scuppered after last-ditch talks to halt security guard strikes at Heathrow Airport failed. More than 1,400 Unite members will walk out from Terminal 5 for 10 days from today. The airport says it's drafting 1,000 extra staff to help passengers. And the King and Queen Consort are in Hamburg for the final day of their 3-day state visit to Germany. King Charles and Camilla have been greeted by the Mayor of Hamburg at City Hall, where they signed the Golden Book. Earlier, they travelled by train to mark the anniversary of the Kindestransport. It's 85 years since the rescue effort which saved thousands of Jewish children from Nazi-controlled territory. The royal couple have also visited the remains of a church destroyed in the Allied bombing of Hamburg in 1943. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. We'll be heading back live to Germany, of course, for the final engagements in this historic first state visit undertaken by the King and Queen Consort to Germany. But just to reflect on the importance, of course, of Hamburg being chosen for the events this morning, 80 years on since the city was bombed by Allied bombers and effectively destroyed in retaliation, of course, for the German bombing of the city of Coventry. Well, earlier they visited the St. Nikolai Memorial, the remains of that church destroyed when they came in, using indeed the church tower as a landmark, a navigation aid to line up for what was called Operation Gomorrah, the bombing raids then using firebombs or incendiary devices and the firestorm adding to the damage. Well, let's speak now to Chris Newton, a military historian who joins us, just to look back at the significance of this act of remembrance, Chris, that we saw today at the memorial in the church, because clearly this was one of the acts that post-war it was questioned whether it was actually necessary, the bombing of a civilian target.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, I mean, this is, an important event in the strategic bombing campaign, in the Allied strategic bombing campaign. It took place at the end of July 1943. The objective was actually to destroy, disrupt, cripple German industry, German production. So that was the primary target of this raid, and it effectively achieved that objective, at least in the short term. Its significance tactically was that it employed the first use of, or an early use of, aluminium foil strips. So an early use of chaff, which the aircraft used, and that's designed to confuse German radar as to where the Allied bombers were. And of course, the wider significance is the numbers of people that were killed in the raids. Around about 40,000 people were killed. As you say, some people debate the effectiveness. The effectiveness on production, but also the morality.
Indeed,
as well.
And of course, it followed the German bombing of Coventry, and whether this was an act, if you like, of retaliation as well. And then the whole argument about civilian populations being brought into modern warfare. Hence, I guess, the reflections this morning when they were looking at the memorial itself, and indeed I think it was the Litany of Reconciliation, the Coventry Litany of Reconciliation that was read by the bishop there, to actually bring the two communities together 80 years on, which is, not that long ago.
Yeah, and this represents a really kind of important symbolic event. As we move further away from these certain events, we can engage in these kinds of acts of memorial, and also engage in a real kind of rational discussion about the significance and the effects of the bombing raids, and whether these whether these bombing raids contributed effectively to the Allied victory, and so forth. So today represents a real kind of symbolism and further acts of reconciliation.
As of course we face, as the King has said, war across Europe, or parts of Europe again now with Ukraine. But Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and of course we will continue to update people. The state visit continuing there in Hamburg, and the final and third day, but more coming up shortly. But let's now reflect on the other headlines, with the UK being accepted into a Indo-Pacific trade bloc. The government saying it's achieved the biggest trade deal since Brexit. Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch saying the accession to the, wait for it, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, got it right the second time around, about the potential for growth tomorrow. Well, we're joined in the studio once more by our political reporter, Olivia Utley. They could have called it something a bit snappier, couldn't they, really?
I keep saying
the Trans-Pacific Partnership or whatever.
Letters in the wrong order.
But let's just reflect on claims and counterclaims, because we've got the government spinning this as the biggest deal since Brexit. But by its own figures, it will only add, by the end of the decade, to the UK economy 0.08% growth of GDP. I mean, it's tiny.
It is absolutely tiny. And the other caveat to the government spin, as you put it, is that of the 11 countries in the partnership, we already have trading agreements with nine of them, which have been carried over from our time in the EU. That said, there are all sorts of other benefits which can't be sort of quantified in such clear numerical terms. So, of course, there's quite a lot of soft power involved. This is a big growing partnership. And as Jeremy Hunt said earlier, by the end of the decade, it's expected that 50% of the world's middle-class people will be in these 11 countries. So getting in early in a partnership like this is pretty interesting.
And much of this in the Chinese back door. So therefore, in terms of geopolitical terms, we've got to get in there, I guess.
Exactly. And China wanted to join this partnership and was unable to. And it doesn't look like China will be able to join it anytime soon. So to have Britain there sort of mitigating against Chinese influence is great. Also, for British supply chains, we are very, very reliant on China at the moment. And obviously, that's a big problem for our security. Right. And this will enable us to diversify our supply chain and have more of our supply chains in some of these 11 regions. So there are big benefits, but as you say, when you talk about it numerically, it doesn't sound brilliant.
Well, we might be able to import, more, and these are free trade agreements. That's the other aspect, of course. It's a free trade area now, effectively, without the tariffs. But we may be importing food stuff. But in terms of our exports, we're being told cheese, chocolate, whiskey, gin, food and drink. We'll come to the food aspect in a moment. But cars, one wonders, well, are we actually manufacturing anything at the moment that we can export to these areas?
Yeah, well, our manufacturing industry is not in a good state at the moment and has quite possibly been actually weakened by yesterday's announcements on the new raft of green energy measures, the net zero measures, because restrictions around British manufacturing of petrol and diesel cars are very, very tight. And meanwhile, the EU, that was promising to do something similar and very tightly regulate its manufacturing industry for petrol and diesel, has now massively liberalised its legislation because it knows that it's going to be really difficult for it to compete.
Yeah,
so now you've got British manufacturing companies competing with EU manufacturing companies with far lighter regulations. So for people who wanted to leave the EU because they thought they'd be free of EU red tape,
so this trade area could still import VWs and Audis and Mercedes with internal combustion engines, but powered by eco-fuel, which is obviously the green aspect that the EU is trying to adopt, in competition with very expensive and limited numbers of electric cars from Britain. I mean, that could be the picture, couldn't it?
Absolutely. So what we'll be relying on quite heavily is using this deal for exporting food. But there are issues around that as well, of course, because food safety standards in the UK are still very, very, very high.
Tight, yeah.
And no government is planning, it seems, to relax food regulations at all.
Olivia, thank you for that. But on that very topic of food, let's now speak to Abby Reader, who's Deputy President of the National Farming Union in Cymru, in Wales. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Have you managed to look through what's quite a comprehensive deal to see what it means for you down in Wales in terms of, I guess, what dairy particularly?
Well, thanks very much. Yes, we're still going through the details. I mean, I think if we compare it to the previous trade deal, which we had with Australia and New Zealand, which in our view was a very low bar to hit, this deal does look like the Prime Minister has considered and taken a much more balanced negotiation. We've got aspirations as a farming union across England and Wales to increase our exports by 30% by 2030, and these trade deals offer opportunities. But still, there are going to be issues within this CPTPP that we have concerns about.
Yeah, and I'm just sort of thinking, does Australia and New Zealand, for instance, actually need our dairy products or even, dare I say, Welsh lamb when, New Zealand lamb is quite a worldwide competitor?
That's right. I mean, Australia and New Zealand in particular are very major agricultural exporters. And if we look now to the likes of Canada and Mexico, they're in that same boat. So what we need to be very careful about is, you've already mentioned it on your programme, we have incredibly high standards in the UK. They're world leading. And we could end up undermining that if we allow food to come in that is a lower animal welfare standard or an environmental standard. And that just seems to cancel out all of the benefits that we're trying to give our domestic production.
Right, what to be able to compete on an international scale and I guess make the exports cheaper?
That's right. So, for example, there will be regulations in other countries on pesticides and antibiotic use that we will not be allowed to use here in the UK. The UK is the third lowest user of antibiotics, and yet we look to Japan or Mexico. They're incredibly high users of antibiotics. Now, that's not belittling their system, but it puts them on a very different setting to us, and certainly it puts them on a much lower cost system than we would be.
OK, politically charged question for you. It's been pointed out that we are probably going to lose 4% of GDP being outside the EU after Brexit. Would it have been better for farming to have stayed in the EU in terms of trading numbers compared to what we're going to get with this new group?
Carefully grafted response back to you. I think the key thing is we're dealing with food, and food is very perishable. So when we look at the EU and we have 500 million consumers right on our doorstep, in many respects in Wales, large parts of the EU are more accessible to us than maybe Scotland. So in terms of exporting food, it makes a huge amount of sense. Obviously, also it's an established market.
OK, so perhaps in terms of European trade, that's something yet to be addressed. And as I say, all sorts of political ramifications as a result of that. But Abby, thank you very much indeed for joining us there, President of National Farming Union in Cymru. Thank you for your time. But let's now keep on the politics of the day, because we've got the latest GB News People's Poll out with Sir Keir Starmer being preferred over someone called Rishi Sunak to address crime and antisocial behaviour. Yes, 28% say the Labour leader, just 16% saying Prime Minister Sunak. However, a significant 45% saying they just don't know. Also in the poll, 12% of the public saying MPs should be allowed to have second jobs, but 60% saying no, should be banned altogether from having them. And in the latest voting intentions, well, Labour still in the lead, well in the lead on 42%, the Tories on 24%, and that would mean, yes, a Labour landslide if an election were to be held today. Well, joining us in the studio, Catherine, once more to run through the figures. I'm just going to pick up on the don't knows, because clearly we're entering a period now where we're going to have local elections, and people are trying to make their mind up over all sorts of issues, as well as this crime and antisocial behaviour. Is there still a significant, I just don't know, is it I just don't care anymore?
A lot of people, I think, were very disaffected with politics in general. Over the last year, we've had a significant amount of chaos, infighting. We're now on the third Prime Minister in less than a year. And I think a lot of people feel that there's many problems that we have. Lots of people feel that Britain's sort of broken, lots of things not working, strikes, cost of living, taxes at a 70-year high, and that the Conservatives have failed to sort these things out over 13 years, and to many minds, things have got worse. And also, they're not excited by Labour anyway. OK, Labour are 42% in the polls, but that's not necessarily an enthusiasm for Keir Starmer or what Labour are offering. It's more a reflection of
worst least option, as some might say it.
The Conservatives, and it'll be interesting to see with the local elections what the turnout will be.
Is it interesting, however, clearly the Tories thought that this issue of crime and antisocial behaviour was going to reverberate and that, you know, a touchstone and ahead of the local elections. That's why it was announced, some suggest, at this period. It doesn't seem to have hit home, according to this poll.
No, it doesn't, because only 16% think that Conservatives with Rishi Sunak would be better on crime and antisocial behaviour, against 28% for Labour with Keir Starmer. So they might have expected all the antisocial behaviour talk to have had more of an effect. But I think what people want to see is less talk and more actual action. People want to see results, don't they? So we're hearing lots of talk from Rishi Sunak about what the government will do.
Yeah.
The question, of course, is, well, you've had 13 years, why haven't you done this? But similarly, Labour are saying, you know, it's one of Keir Starmer's 5 missions, make Britain's streets safe. But I don't think that motto has sort of cut through to the public either. It's just there's a lot of dissatisfaction, and crime in England and Wales is at an all-time high. And conviction rates are very, very low.
We've got the clock ticking towards a general election, and we've got in now less than a month the local elections. I mean, how much is that going to be a litmus test of where the country feels it is politically, and whether, in fact, the Tories are going to be able to make up that lost ground before next year?
Well, of course, traditionally, local elections are a good chance to give whoever is in charge a good kicking. A good kicking, exactly the same words I'm going to use. But, you know, they didn't do well. The last time these seats were up in local elections was 2019 under Theresa May. There was Brexit gridlock. They were given an absolute hammering, the Conservatives, then, but they're still expecting probably to lose up to another 1,000 seats. So the Tories are prepared for the very worst. That's why they launched their local election campaign a week ago. Hardly anybody even knew it was in the Black Country, I believe. It was only local media. It sort of vanished without trace, whereas Labour are making a big fuss about it yesterday in Swindon. But a lot of people are fed up with the lot of them, really, aren't they? And also the thing about second jobs, you know, that sting last week led by donkeys, seeing ex-Tory ministers on video potentially going to be paid £10,000 a day by a South Korean company that doesn't exist is a really terrible look.
Especially when you're Matt Hancock. However, thank you very much indeed for bringing us those poll results. More, of course, reaction to come. It's enough to maybe get you to move abroad. Not if you're trying to travel through Terminal 5 at Heathrow. Yes, strikes are disrupting flights, so we'll be updating you there on the latest outside the airport. Let's take a look at what the weather's like back here in Blighty.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Staying windy in the south through the rest of the day, with further outbreaks of rain for many across the UK, but both the wind and the rain will gradually ease through the afternoon and evening. We end March with low pressure firmly in place across the southern half of the UK. We've had gales blowing through the south of England and South Wales overnight, and those strong winds with gales for exposed spots will continue during the afternoon, eventually relenting, but still the potential for 40, 50 mile per hour gusts, and in some exposed spots 60 mile per hour gusts. Outbreaks of rain spiralling around that low, with the heaviest rain for southwest England, risk of localised flooding here, and some showers elsewhere. Brightest skies there for the northeast and the west of Scotland, and where we get some sunshine coming through, still the potential for 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will feel chilly around the North Sea coast, where we continue to see an easterly breeze into the evening. And overnight, further spells of rain for Northern Ireland, showers for western Scotland, and some persistent rain there for South Wales as well as central southern England. Showery bits and pieces elsewhere, a lot of cloud, and so a frost-free night. A grey start to the day for many, a lot of cloud cover, especially for the east coast of England and Scotland, where that cloud will be low and it'll be covering the hills. Spells of rain or drizzle coming in here through Saturday. Also outbreaks of rain for western parts of Northern Ireland into parts of southwest England, but things are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some sunshine developing for western Scotland, parts of Wales and the south of England by the afternoon. And here temperatures will reach 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will stay chilly on that North Sea coast with the wind coming in from the east. And that wind will push further cloud and spells of light rain westwards through Saturday night. However, it is an improving picture as we begin April. Brighter skies and drier conditions are expected for all of us.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, let's update you on what's happening if you want to get away for Easter, just having seen the weather forecast. 10 days of strikes beginning from today at Heathrow. Last-ditch talks failing to resolve a dispute over pay. Well, more than 1,400 security staff from the Unite union have walked out, leaving many flights being cancelled, BA particularly because it's Terminal 5. Let's get the latest now outside Heathrow. Our news reporter, Theo Chicombo. And Theo, the picket line is there, the flags are flying. Are the planes flying?
They are indeed, and they have been throughout the day. There have been some minor disruptions here at Heathrow. The management here tell us that things are running, but of course there is disruption. They spoke about contingency plans over the last few days. People who normally work in other parts of the airport are being drafted in today to ensure that things are running smoothly. You may be able to see just behind me, there is a picket line here. This is just a group of people, one of many picket lines in this area, 1,400 security staff who normally work inside Terminal 5 here at Heathrow. And as you mentioned, people are looking to get away for Easter in the next week or so. This is just the first of 10 days. Now, earlier I spoke to the regional representative of Unite Union in this area, Wayne, and this is what he had to say.
We've been in paid talks with Heathrow Airport now for the last few months, and unfortunately we've been able to find an agreement on pay that would match the current cost of living. So the company aren't moving, so we've been forced to take strike action.
So just explain to me what the deal is at the moment and what the preferred one would be.
The deal for us at the moment has got to match the current cost of living being experienced by our members. RPI is currently around 13% and the company offered 10. In normal times 10 might be acceptable, but it's not acceptable at the moment. They fired and rehired their entire workforce during the pandemic. They cut their pay by up to 20% during the pandemic. You know, members have had a real terms pay cut by a quarter in the last few years. They just can't survive on the pay that they're getting now, and the company have got to do it. Some of them are on as little as £12 an hour, and then, you know, they just can't survive on that at the moment, and the money needs to go up.
So Heathrow Airport themselves have accused the union Unite of refusing the pay offer that they've been given. They're saying it's above inflation, 10% pay rise, backdated to the 1st of January, and of course a lump sum of $1,150. Of course, this strike means there is going to be disruption. The advice is if you are travelling, please do check in advance and of course give yourself plenty of time on your way here. But Unite Union have said what the pay offer that they've been offered is simply not good enough. Security staff are paid around £30,000, and during the pandemic a lot of them were let go but then rehired with less money, and of course that is one message they are trying to point out today as they're here on the picket line for the rest of the day, and of course first of 10 days.
Indeed, perhaps a bit of a bitter legacy, as you're saying, in terms of their employment conditions after that pandemic. Theo, thank you for updating us there. I can tell you, I think 72 flights cancelled so far by BA today. But as Theo is saying, make sure that you check with the airline and we'll update you with the 10 days to go, of course, if you're trying to get away for Easter. Now, let's update you on all the headlines and get the latest now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's 1:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After nearly 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whisky. It's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are due to stand trial in January next year over the death of their baby. The runaway pair from West Sussex have been charged with gross negligence manslaughter. The couple appeared in court earlier. They didn't enter pleas and have been remanded in custody. They've also been charged with concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. 2 teenagers have been arrested in connection with the death of an elderly woman in Suffolk. Officers were called to a house in Pakefield at 2 p.m. on Saturday after reports 82-year-old Joy Middleditch had been found lying on the floor following a robbery. 2 boys aged 15 and 14, both from the Lowestoft area, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. And an explosion in space the same size as our entire solar system has left scientists baffled. It happened 180 million light years away, and astronomers say it was much flatter than they ever thought possible. Instead of being spherical, it was a disc-like shape. Scientists at the University of Sheffield say it changes everything they thought they knew about explosions in space. TV online and DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Mark's back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live, and let's update you with the latest in the USA now, where Donald Trump is the first former US president to face criminal charges because a grand jury in New York has now voted to indict him over possible offences related to so-called hush money paid to a former porn star, Stormy Daniels. But the Republicans are calling the indictment an outrage and a witch hunt. Democrats say no one should be above the law. Well, joining us now on the show is Dr. Thomas Gift, founding director of UCL Centre on US Politics. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Thomas. And we are sort of in uncharted territory a little bit, aren't we? Because clearly in terms of the lead-up to the 2024 presidential race, we're trying to work out where this would leave Trump if he is indeed facing this charge.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is just such a bombshell revelation. I mean, Donald Trump, of course, is the first former U.S. president to ever be indicted with a crime. And so this is a real shattering, I think, to political norms. Of course, critics of Donald Trump say that no one should be above the law. But at the same time, to not only have a former U.S. president, but one who is currently the most likely Republican nominee for president in 2024 to be facing these criminal charges as he's going into a campaign stretch where he's trying to kick off his election bid. It is just a really big issue.
And of course, the question, what happens next? I mean, we've got our cameras at Mar-a-Lago, the Trump compound down in Florida, and of course in New York as well, where he's expected to perhaps face the arraignment on Tuesday. I think it's a suggestion. Police already upping the security there. I mean, there are Republican voices saying that Trump won't be too displeased to be seen in handcuffs or having his fingerprints taken, and he can play the victim card, if you like.
Or whether it's this issue, it's always a witch hunt. And so we're very familiar with the language that Trump uses. It's a political vendetta. It's a George Soros-funded hit job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that he's able to do that sort of effectively. And I think he'll be able to do that effectively in this case in particular, because think of all of the different legal troubles that Donald Trump is facing. This case is probably the weakest, and it is probably the most minor. So I think that if Donald Trump can effectively frame this as a witch hunt, he may get some voters, on the fence voters, moderate voters, to think, well, maybe some of these other legal woes that he's facing are also witch hunts. I think it really plays into his hands.
Yeah, and just to explain to people, I mean, the allegation is the $130,000 paid to Stormy Daniels as so-called hush money. But the problem being, it was then put down as a business expense, and that's what's triggered the misdemeanor, I think is the technical phrase, with New York state law.
Exactly. I mean, this really goes back a long time. I mean, the allegation that Stormy Daniels made was that she and Donald Trump had sex in 2006, and then the alleged payment occurred in 2016, which was in the days in the lead up to his election bid there. But a lot of critics essentially say, there's just not a lot there. Donald Trump has already admitted that he has paid this hush money. It's not illegal to pay somebody for their silence via a non-disclosure act. But of course, if it does implicate campaign funds or business funds, then it can be a slightly different issue. So I think that the legal bar here is going to be quite high, and I'm not sure if the prosecutor is going to be able to reach it.
Ah, right. That's an interesting aspect. I mean, we are just looking at, as we say, the picture outside the court building in New York and the Trump compound in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, the other aspect to this, they're both very quiet at the moment, but it's feared, of course, that his supporters could take direct action, as we saw in terms of the scenes on Capitol Hill. I mean, that presumably would damage him politically.
Well, I think certainly that has the potential to do so. And Donald Trump, up until this point, has been doing nothing to kind of dampen some of the passions that we're seeing from the other side. Of course, Donald Trump on Twitter and on Truth Social and on other social media platforms has basically been saying, this is a witch hunt. There are going to be bad things to come if the district attorney in New York goes ahead with this prosecution. So certainly security concerns are there, and police are being vigilant. We all know what some of Donald Trump's language led to on January 6th. So there's always that potential. Hopefully it won't happen, but it's a real possibility.
And where does this leave the field politically? I mean, I think Fox News is suggesting that Trump has doubled his lead over Ron DeSantis to 30 points. But, of course, clearly DeSantis is a poster boy for the Republican Party. Is this going to skew things as we lead up to 2024?
Well, again, I do think that this has the potential to help Donald Trump. And at this point, I do believe that Donald Trump is the prohibitive favorite to get the Republican nomination. We have to remember when we look at one-on-one matchups of Donald Trump, for example, against Ron DeSantis, opponents do relatively well, but it's really not a one-on-one race. It's Donald Trump versus all other Republicans. And so if we think about some of the early primary states where Donald Trump's support has a floor of about 30 to 40%. If other potential nominees split the anti-Trump vote, that really allows Donald Trump to run the table, especially in some of these states where there's winner-take-all delegates. So I think Donald Trump does have the advantage. And to the extent that some Republicans, even moderate Republicans, are in a position where they need to defend him on this particular issue, that's all to his better.
Yeah, or Donald Trump versus the rest of the world, maybe, is the other aspect. We'll see what emerges, of course, Tuesday onwards. Dr. Thomas Gift, thank you very much indeed for joining us, founding director at UCL Centre on US Politics. Now, let's head back to this third historic day of the state visit of King Charles and the Queen Consort to Germany. He's laid a wreath at St. Nikolai Memorial in Hamburg, dedicated, of course, to the victims of the Allied bombings of Hamburg during World War II. Today's the third day of the state visit, the King and Queen Consort wrapping up a much-praised state visit. Let's get the latest now with our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who's been following, a pretty packed schedule, Cameron, these past 3 days.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. It's very hard to keep up, actually, to be perfectly honest. But this morning they arrived in Hamburg via a train. They'd spent the first 2 days of this historic state visit in Berlin. It was all about reconciliation, really, this morning, which is a theme the King touched on during his first ever address to the Bundestag, the German Bundestag, German Parliament, yesterday, talking about reconciliation between Germany and the UK following the 2 world wars. So the King and Queen Consorts were at the Kindertransport Memorial earlier on today, which commemorates the 10,000 children which, under a British-led plan, were transported to England just before the breakout of World War II in 1938 to escape the Nazi regime, and to be given safe passage to England. The Queen Consort laid a white flower there. The two of them then went to St. Nikolai Church, which is, I say church, it's the ruin of a church. It's now a memorial because it was bombed by the Allies in 1943. It's the 80th anniversary this year of that bombing, and both the King, British King, and the German president laid wreaths, which I think perhaps shows just how far our relations have come since the Second World War. And that, of course, is the whole point of this state visit. It's strengthening relations between two nations. It's under British government advice that Buckingham Palace decides where to send the King and Queen Consort on a state visit. And it was perhaps thought that shoring up relations with one of our closest European neighbours in this post-Brexit world, as the war in Ukraine rages on, was the best thing to do diplomatically rather than a Commonwealth nation, which is what Queen Elizabeth II did in 1953. Then they were here, where I am, at the City Hall in Hamburg, the seat of the Hamburg government here, and this whole square behind me was packed with crowds who had turned out, despite the rain, to see the King and Queen Consorts. The King and Queen Consort spent a long time meeting as many people as possible. They then went inside to sign the Golden Book, which is something Queen Elizabeth II did in 1965. And they also made a surprise appearance on the balcony here, and the crowd went wild. There was a lot of cheering going on. The King and Queen Consort have now split off. The Queen's on her way to a school to do some literacy engagement, reading to children, the Gruffalo, that famous children's story. The King is going on a boat to look at some hydroelectric power initiative, all about sustainability and climate change for the King this afternoon. Then the two of them will meet up again to round off this 3-day state visit for a reception with around 1,000 people in Hamburg. But it's been a success, to be perfectly honest, Mark, this whole trip so far. The German population seem to adore the King and Queen Consort. Yeah. They still have this global presence, that global star presence, which Queen Elizabeth II did all those years when she was on the throne.
And of course, just to underline the significance of this, I mean, 80 years since Allied bombers flattened, literally, Hamburg in Operation Gomorrah. I mean, I think the most tonnage of any German city in terms of what was dropped on them. And yet this act of reconciliation at the memorial. And then we understand that when the RAF Voyager carries the royal couple away from Germany back to Britain, it will be escorted by 2 Luftwaffe jets, Typhoons.
Yes, exactly. The reason why the Allies bombed Hamburg in 1943 was almost in retaliation. I was reading in the Memorial Museum this morning for the city bombing of the Luftwaffe did of Coventry in the Midlands, the British city. That was essentially flattened and the cathedral destroyed. So clearly the same thing happened in Hamburg in 1943, pretty much. And this whole reconciliation 80 years after the event, I think perhaps speaks volumes to that. And you're right, the relationships between Britain and and Germany very much have improved since that time, and they're very much strengthening still.
We've just got the live pictures coming in now as we speak to you, Cameron, in the square with the King in terms of this visit to the port of Hamburg and this sort of green energy and instance of, I think, sustainable shipping, as they call it. Of course, Hamburg with a huge industrial footprint. And it's the port itself, or the city, committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And that will be close to the King's heart.
It certainly will be. He's expected to learn about the Port of Hamburg's kind of adoption of these green technologies. He's going to be meeting representatives from some of the companies involved in that. And then he's joining, as I've mentioned earlier, guests on a boat trip past an electrolyser site, which helps generate power. And the site is destined to be one of those key milestones of the hydrogen economy in Germany. And it's given an insight into how this transformation really will become a reality. As you said, they want to be net zero pretty soon by 2050, and it's basically the heart of an ambitious port. And again, it's the King's global star power, really, by shining a light on initiatives such as this, which I think the King will see as important. As we know, he's spent at least 50 years now publicly championing the idea of sustainability and climate change. When he first started doing it in the 1970s, many people didn't take him seriously as a young Prince of Wales. But now, you know, he's now king, and I think a lot more people are taking him seriously. And I think it just shows that the fact that him being here and the media are talking about it, and therefore people all over the country, in both Germany and the United Kingdom, will be talking about it. I think he's clearly met his task of shining a spotlight on a cause close to his heart.
And you know, one reflects taking his stance on environmentalism and green issues a lot more seriously than when we had those sort of unkind comments about him talking to plants, of course, as the Prince of Wales all those years ago. But I won't press you on how the electrolyser works. However, it's interesting that it's actually, I think, the site of a retired coal power station. So they're using a sort of new approach in a I think at the Moorburg coal-fired power station, which is an interesting approach the day after we had the revelation, of course, here about the government's net zero aspects, where they want to, well, get new oil and gas fields going.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of adjacent to what's called the Docklands Pier, and it's a smart port energy station, which at Shore kind of power facility. It was installed in 2015 to reduce air pollution, and this lets boats and vessels to link into the port's net zero ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050. So again, this big industrial port, which would have been, you know, a hub of northern Germany's kind of industrial output in the 1800s, 1900s, lots of smog, lots of pollution, is now cleaning up its act and seems to be on track to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is something which will be welcomed by King Charles.
Just plenty of rain today, no smog. But thank you for updating us there, the square with the umbrella as ever. Cameron, thank you. More, of course, on this final state visit day. We'll update you a little later with more live pictures. But let's now reflect on the events at the Old Bailey today, with an aristocrat and a partner facing trial following the death of their baby daughter. That's now to be held early next year, we're being told. 35-year-old Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, who's 48, both charged with manslaughter, concealing a child's birth and perverting the course of justice. Well, the remains of that baby girl found in an area of woodland near Brighton, you remember, in East Sussex. Joining us now, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. And of course, Mark, you were covering that search and the ramifications for that, and now the due legal process as a result of it all. We don't have the audio with Mark at the court at the moment. Apologies for that. Let's just see if we can get a better connection and get the line back, because as we were saying, the revelation at the court about when the full trial will be heard in terms of that case. Just to remind you, of course, it follows the discovery of that baby girl's remains in woodland just north of Brighton. And I think Mark is back with us. Mark, we can hear you now, I think. I was saying you were following that case, of course, in the search at the time, and now the due legal process continuing from that.
That's right, Mark. 2 days, really, of frantic searching with hundreds of police officers, mountain rescue teams and other specialists brought in as they were fighting, they thought, against the clock to try to find this 2-month-old baby after Constance Martin and Mark Gordon had been detained, arrested on the night of the 27th of February in the north of Brighton. This was a culmination of many weeks in which this couple had been, for whatever reason, on the run. It was the 5th of January when their car was found abandoned and on fire in a lay-by on the M61 near Bolton. In the days that followed, they were seen at various points on CCTV in Liverpool, down in Essex, in East London, and eventually down in East Sussex as well, with multiple appeals by the police to try to trace the couple, with concerns over the welfare of Constance Martin in particular and that young child. But of course, it ended with the detention of this couple and arrest in Brighton, and then 2 days later, the terrible discovery of an infant's body on a local allotment in a greenhouse. It was wrapped in plastic, according to the magistrate's court initial hearing, under a pile of nappies. There have been post-mortem examinations that have taken place since then that so far have been unable to determine the cause of death. But this couple are facing charges of gross negligence, manslaughter, of concealing the birth of a child, and of perverting the course of justice. This was their first Crown Court appearance here at the Old Bailey today. We're told that they will be back here for a plea hearing in June, and then the actual trial itself, Mark, is scheduled for the 2nd of January next year.
And any indication what the court gave in terms of why that is such a long period before the full trial comes through?
Well, there's a lot of evidence. He didn't go into the detail of why there would be such a delay, but there is an awful lot of evidence, and of course there's medical evidence to go as well and to gather, because, as I say, those initial post-mortem and toxicology examinations did not give an accurate assessment of how this infant died. So there are further tests that are being carried out there. But as I say, it'll be June when we get that plea and case management hearing here at the Old Bailey, and then the full trial, the 2nd of January, is scheduled for. But these things, again, can slip given the backlog that the courts are facing generally. But this couple remanded back into custody now to await the continuation of that legal process.
Mark, outside the Old Bailey, thank you very much indeed for updating us, and apologies to everyone for the break-up in the signal there. But let's now tell you that we'll be hearing from small businesses about what the government's new trade deal may bring. The government claiming it's the biggest since Brexit. We'll see what small business thinks and whether they think it's a big deal. Before that, is the weather a big deal for us as the weekend beckons?
Hello there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Staying windy in the south through the rest of the day, with further outbreaks of rain for many across the UK, but both the wind and the rain will gradually ease through the afternoon and evening. We end March with low pressure firmly in place across the southern half of the UK. We've had gales blowing through the south of England and South Wales overnight, and those strong winds with gales for exposed spots will continue during the afternoon, eventually relenting, but still the potential for 40, 50 mile per hour gusts, and in some exposed spots 60 mile per hour gusts. Outbreaks of rain spiralling around that low, with the heaviest rain for southwest England, risk of localised flooding here, and some showers elsewhere. Brightest skies there for the northeast and the west of Scotland, and where we get some sunshine coming through, still the potential for 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will feel chilly around the North Sea coast, where we continue to see an easterly breeze into the evening and overnight. Further spells of rain for Northern Ireland, showers for western Scotland, and some persistent rain there for South Wales as well as central southern England. Showery bits and pieces elsewhere, a lot of cloud, and so a frost-free night. A grey start to the day for many, a lot of cloud cover, especially for the east coast of England and Scotland, where that cloud will be low and it'll be covering the hills. Spells of rain or drizzle coming in here through Saturday. Also outbreaks of rain for western parts of Northern Ireland into parts of southwest England, but things are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some sunshine developing for western Scotland, parts of Wales and the south of England by the afternoon. And here temperatures will reach 13 or 14 Celsius, but it will stay chilly on that North Sea coast with the wind coming in from the east. And that wind will push further cloud and spells of light rain westwards through Saturday night. However, it is an improving picture as we begin April. Brighter skies and drier conditions are expected for all of us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Very good afternoon and welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up for you this Friday afternoon. It's described by the government as the biggest trade deal since Brexit. But Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch has already had to defend the agreement with the Trans-Pacific Partnership after the government's own figures showed it'll only boost the economy by 0.08%. Donald Trump, the first US president to face criminal charges. He's been indicted by the grand jury in New York over allegations he paid hush money to a former porn actress prior to his election in 2016. We'll have the latest from the States as police in New York and Florida prepare for what they fear could be violent protests. and remembering the victims of the war. King Charles and the Queen Consort on the final day of their state visit to Germany in Hamburg, a city destroyed by Allied bombers in 1943. 80 years on, the two countries come together. Before that, latest news headlines coming up with Rihanna.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After nearly 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whisky. It's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth.
The significance of joining the Pacific Trade Bloc is that this is one of the fastest growing areas in the world. Around half of the world's middle-class consumers will be in this bloc of countries by the end of the decade. It's a massive opportunity for British exporters, and combined with the very attractive business taxes that we introduced in the budget, a £9 billion cut in corporation tax, that will mean that the UK economy has very big long-term growth opportunities.
Donald Trump becomes the first former US president to face criminal charges after he was indicted by a grand jury in New York. Trump, we with you. Last night, his supporters gathered in front of his Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. New York prosecutors have been investigating the alleged payment of hush money to an adult film star prior to his election in 2016. The payment was legal, but Trump allegedly recorded it as a business expense, which is illegal in New York. Trump says he's innocent. The Manhattan investigation is one of several legal challenges against the former president. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are due to stand trial in January next year over the death of their baby. The runaway pair from West Sussex have been charged with gross negligence manslaughter. The couple appeared in court earlier. They didn't tender pleas and have been remanded in custody. They've also been charged with concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. 2 teenagers have been arrested in connection with the death of an elderly woman in Suffolk. Officers were called to a house in Pakefield at 2 p.m. on Saturday after reports 82-year-old Joy Middleditch had been found lying on the floor following a robbery. 2 boys, aged 15 and 14, both from the Lowestoft area, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. A review into culture at England's fire and rescue services has found that racist, sexist and homophobic comments have been dismissed as banter. The damning report says behaviours that have gone unchallenged include humiliating new recruits, acting out rape and expecting women to make tea. His Majesty's Inspector of Fire and Rescue Services says the deeply troubling findings at all 44 services in England are both shocking and appalling. Holiday seekers could see their Easter plans scuppered after last-ditch talks to halt security guard strikes at Heathrow Airport failed. More than 1,400 Unite members have walked out from Terminal 5 for 10 days. The airport says it's drafting in 1,000 extra staff to help passengers. Oscar Pistorius is up for parole after serving half of his sentence for killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. The former Paralympian was sentenced to 13 years for shooting Ms. Steenkamp at his home in South Africa on Valentine's Day in 2013. If granted parole, Pistorius, now aged 36, could be released within a matter of days. Riva's family says he doesn't deserve to be freed.
They don't feel that he should be released. They feel that he has shown no remorse. He's not rehabilitated because if he had been, he would have come clean and told the true story of what happened that night. The Supreme Court of Appeal found that there were inconsistencies in his testimony. He could have clarified it. He did not testify in mitigation when he was afforded the opportunity to do so.
And the Queen Consort and King Charles are in Hamburg for the final day of their 3-day state visit to Germany. Charles is currently on a green energy boat tour where he's been hearing about the project and how it contributes to the city's goal to hit net zero, its target of net zero by 2050. Earlier, the royal couple travelled by train to mark the anniversary of the Kindertransport. It's 85 years since the rescue effort, which saved thousands of Jewish children from Nazi-controlled territory. They have also visited the remains of a church which was destroyed in Allied bombing of Hamburg in 1943. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Yana, thanks very much indeed. So the UK accepted into an Indo-Pacific trade bloc, the government saying it's achieved the biggest trade deal since Brexit. Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch saying the accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership is about the potential for growth tomorrow. Well, we're joined now in the studio by our political reporter, Olivia Utley, because, Olivia, there is a question about what the growth is today, with the government's own figures indicating even by the end of the decade it'll only add 0.08% to GDP. So are they bigging it up?
Well, in numerical terms, it certainly doesn't sound particularly impressive. And it must be said that of the 11 countries in the bloc, Britain already has bilateral trading agreements with 9 of them, which are carried over from our time when we were in the EU. The other two are Malaysia and Brunei. I mean, great to have trade deals with those countries, but it's not a huge breakthrough, as it were. That said, on a more kind of macro level, it is pretty important and interesting. It's a sign of Britain's intent on the global stage, and coming so closely off the back of the AUKUS agreement being reached, the weapons manufacturing deal with Japan being reached. Yeah. It's how the government is framing it is that Britain is having this Indo-Pacific tilt, and that it's now facing the Indo-Pacific region, which could be a pretty powerful move, because in the next 10 years, it's thought that by the end of the decade, 50% of the world's middle-class people could be in those 11 regions. And the size of the bloc is now 15% of world GDP, which is a little bit more than the EU last year. Yeah. So it's a pretty powerful trading
potential
bloc.
growth. And I guess in geopolitical terms, the other consideration is China. And by this move, I guess there's a more effective block to Chinese trade with these particular countries.
Absolutely. So China has wanted to join this trading partnership. It's been blocked from joining. It doesn't look like it's going to be able to join anytime soon. But we do know that China has a lot of influence in the region. It's essentially China's back door. And in having Britain as part of this partnership, it mitigates against that Chinese influence in the region. From Britain's perspective, it's also good because it allows us to diversify away from having our supply chains in China. And we know that it's obviously a big problem for our security, having lots of stuff that we need made in China. Now we'll be able to diversify that and use some of these other regions.
Yeah, the whole issue of Huawei, the phone companies, of course, and Chinese microprocessors and what they're actually doing in various devices. It's interesting that with Pat McFadden, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, has given it a cautious welcome, but wants to look at the detail. The CBI welcoming the deal is a milestone for British industry. So there are thumbs up, but clearly the sort of shadow, if you like, of Brexit, where we've got the Office of Budget Responsibility saying, look, we've lost 4% of GDP through Brexit and not trading directly with the EU.
Well, exactly. So you've got 4% of GDP lost through lost relationships over Brexit, and then you've got 0.08% of growth in the next 10 years from this partnership, which doesn't sound great on the sort of headline figures. Brexiteers would argue that while the EU is slowly losing global dominance, and you can see that its percentage of world GDP has gone down year on year for the last 3 or 4 years, this partnership is going up. And the hope is for Britain that by the end of the decade, the Indo-Pacific Partnership will be perhaps more powerful than the EU partnership. And, of course, there's the benefit of not having to have any of the politicised element of being inside the EU. Exactly.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's look at the list where we're talking about food and drink, cars, cheese, whiskey, gin and chocolate, no less. Well, let's speak now to Louisa Vichinanza-Bedi, who's the owner of Louisa's Vegan Chocolates, in the shop there with the tasty fare behind you. Thank you for your time. Does this sort of open new doors, do you think?
Well, let's hope so, because at the moment it's impossible to send any goods abroad to the EU. It's actually easier to send to the US. Literally everything will get stopped. Customers will have to pay a high duty and tax. And we just have to say to people, I'm really sorry, but it's not possible to send to Germany, France. And it's really disappointing as a small business owner that makes great award-winning products in the UK, sort of holding the flag for UK manufacturing, you know, on a small batch level, that we can't send these lovely products out to customers that are desperately wanting them. So, let's really hope things change.
Yeah, is that because of the paperwork or the additional cost in getting all the sort of various tariff and custom agreements?
Literally everything. The paperwork, I really wouldn't know where to start. Goods that I have tried to send have been stopped, or customers have had to pay more to receive the goods than the value of the chocolate. And it's just the bureaucracy, the paperwork. I mean, literally nobody talks about this, but I know, you know, small businesses that have folded because they can't get goods in and they can't get goods out. Literally, it's diabolical, it's serious, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. So let's really hope things change.
OK, well, let me give you the list. I mean, you know, and there are trade agreements already with a lot of these countries. Australia and New Zealand, Japan, Canada, Chile, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, Brunei and Vietnam. Where would you fancy sending your chocolates?
Well, one, you've got the problem with the heat. Luckily, we do supply Selfridges, so they've managed to get some chocolates out to some of those customers in those destinations. We've got the problem of storage, you know, of freight. You know, how does it get stored? Does it get left? You know, things need to change really. And without this whole set up properly, who's to know? Because there's no good sending products abroad if they're not going to reach the customer in good condition.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I guess
far, you know, it's...
Yeah, I was going to say,
so
even with a free trade agreement, you've got to work in the cost of getting things as far out as Peru and Singapore. You know, that's not going to be cheap, is it?
No, not at all. It's the cost of delivery. And also a lot of those goods need to come into us, you know, bean supplies and things like that. It needs to be something really set up so it's easier for companies like myself, small companies, to actually access this information and support really for us, because we want to grow our economy.
Just on that topic, actually, while you're with us, I mean, how are you coping? Because obviously one of the things that may hit people now is the help on energy bills will be coming to an end, and I presume, you know, you need a lot of refrigeration there to keep your products chilled.
Yeah, well, what we do here is small batch slow food. So it goes all the way from the beans being shipped to us in a sustainable way on ships, and then we small batch roast, and everything costs money because it's a slow food to make chocolate the way we do. So we've got the roasting, the conching. It takes 3 days to actually make a small batch of chocolate from start to finish. So, the costs of running the machinery is around about £10 a day. It's a dramatic cost, which we haven't put back to the customers yet because we still want to give this quality product for Easter. But we're absorbing the cost, but we won't be able to do it for much longer. We really do need help.
Yeah, despite what the Bank of England governor's telling you to do and not put your prices up. Yeah, difficult times. But thank you very much indeed for joining us and updating us with your assessment. It's great to hear, of course, from small businesses at the sharp end. Louisa, thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll keep in touch perhaps with Louisa and see how that particular firm is coping with all the economic pressures. Now, let's get you up to date with things in the United States, where Donald Trump's the first former US president to face criminal charges. That grand jury in New York voting to indict him over offences related to hush money paid to the former porn star Stormy Daniels. That to take place on Tuesday, we're being told. Well, Republicans calling that indictment an outrage and a witch hunt. Democrats saying no one should be above the law. Well, joining us now on the show, Susan Platt, Joe Biden's former chief of staff when he was senator. Susan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Justice should be done and seen to be done?
Well, it's a very unprecedented time in the United States, obviously, but the thing we have to remember is with this indictment, which we believe there will be 30 counts, may just be the first shoe to drop. Remember, we have the special counsel about January 6th. We have the state attorney general in New York and others going. So this may just be the first of several, and it's a very unsettling time. We've never had this happen before and hopefully never have it happen again, but we'll just have to let it play out. No one is above the law, and we've all said that, and we all agree with that. And the Republicans agree with that when it's not one of theirs.
Yeah. What about the political playbook, however? I mean, there are those suggesting that Trump won't be too displeased with this. It is his playbook where he can appear to be the victim if he's in handcuffs or having to have his fingerprints taken and so on.
Well, I can't imagine it'd be a fun thing to do. Of course, he's going to say that. And really politically, this could help him in the primary process because he's eating up all the oxygen out there. That's all we're talking about is Donald Trump. And yes, you're right. He can play the victim, and it may help him in the primary process because no one else will be able to break through. However, I don't believe it will do any good for him in the general election. I think people are tired of having a twice impeached president who's now been indicted for over 30 counts from what we hear, and maybe more coming.
Yeah. And could the tipping point be, I mean, we've had our cameras at Mar-a-Lago this morning and New York. It's peaceful there, but obviously the police in New York are getting the barriers up outside the court building. If things do turn violent, will that get many Republicans to reassess, do you think?
I think it will. I think we've seen that this former president has no qualms about inciting violence when it comes to when he believes he's been wronged. And that's bad for the country. That's bad for our democracy. And if I was a Republican, I would say it'd be bad for me, too.
And just to touch on the 2024 presidential race, what is your reflection on Joe Biden's position? Because clearly the criticism has been that, he is going to be pretty elderly by that stage, and there have been these questions over his mental faculties.
Well, yes, he is going to be over 80, but as I recall, you had a queen well into her late 90s, and she did a pretty darn good job. And I think our president right now is doing a pretty darn good job of getting us through COVID, trying to get inflation under control, trying to level the playing field and increase manufacturing jobs. I think he's doing all right, and I think he'll be reelected in 2024.
OK, and let's reflect Donald Trump, of course, no spring chicken himself. However, that's a bipartisan approach. Thank you very much for joining us, Susan, Joe Biden's former chief of staff. So that's one view, but let's speak now to Richard Valdez, a US radio host and political commentator. And perhaps we reflect, Richard, on the other political side of the fence in terms of Democrats and Republicans. Is it the case that many Republicans will be waiting to see what's said in this New York arraignment?
No, I don't think many Republicans are waiting to see what's be said. I think we've seen the weaponization and political weaponization, rather, of the legal system against Trump since he was a candidate, right? So right now we've got the Democrats now using the legal system to play politics to interfere in the 2024 presidential election by indicting their number one competitor. So this is nothing new to people who've been paying attention. It's nothing new to Donald Trump. We saw it with Robert Mueller Russia investigation. We've seen it with the spying both in Trump Tower and when he was president. And we're seeing it again now. We've seen it with 2 impeachments that didn't result in convictions. So again, nothing new when it comes to attacking Trump on baseless claim.
However, when one looks at the details and this $130,000 paid to Stormy Daniels, the issue, of course, being whether that was then put down as a business expense and campaign finance regulations and so on, he does have to answer the charges, doesn't he?
Again, we'll see how that goes in court. Number one, it wasn't a business expense. It was written as a legal expense because he reimbursed his lawyer who was unsolicited but made this payment on his behalf. And they're saying that although he was paying his lawyer, that it wasn't a legal expense, that it was a political expense because he was intending to run for president. This is going to be a very big bridge to cross to prove that he did this with malice in any way. So it's a very flimsy case that may not result in anything of a conviction. So I think we have to give him his day in court, number one. Number two, this charge is actually outside of the statute of limitations. And it's also a charge that the United States Department of Justice chose not to pursue because they felt there was no violation, as well as the Federal Election Commission also chose to not pursue. It's nothing new. We've been hearing about this for 7 going on 8 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a there.
What about Susan Platt's point about these other legal charges that may now come forward and the sort of overall image then that's given of a former president who's a rule and maybe a lawbreaker? Will the mud stick in this 2024 presidential campaign?
Promote for Donald Trump, saying, you know what? He's a lawbreaker. He's this, he's that. He makes phone calls with Zelensky. He's withholding aid. They've tried to paint Trump as the bad guy from very early on. And something Ms. Platt mentioned I thought was interesting was she said Joe Biden's doing a good job. And all I could think of is a good job at what? Increasing inflation, increasing tension around the world with Russia, China, and Iran. If that's the good job that Democrats are looking for, then I guess they can expect more of that from Joe Biden.
And fears for violence on the streets. Clearly, we've seen the barriers going up outside the court building there in Manhattan and supporters outside Mar-a-Lago. I mean, could that change the political landscape if we have more violence?
I don't expect any violence. I think violence typically comes, as we saw on January 6th, when you have undercover FBI agents stoking the flames, or if you have people that are affiliated with Antifa, the anti-fascist group, that are notoriously against Republicans and conservatives. So I've never seen conservative Republicans become violent. I don't expect them to become violent now. If you look at the images you're showing on your screen, if you've ever seen a Trump rally, violence isn't synonymous with Donald Trump. That seems to be more political theater coming from the left within the media in the United States.
Although maybe some on Capitol Hill may disagree with that particular point. But anyway, Richard, thank you very much indeed for joining us with your assessment. We'll see, of course, what happens in New York on Tuesday. Thank you very much indeed. You're watching GB News Live. Coming up, more on our GB News People's Poll and what the public are saying about what MPs should be doing with second jobs. Revealing that in a moment. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. We'll be updating you shortly on the decision in South Africa about convicted killer Oster Pistorius and his attempt to get a bid for freedom and his position of parole. Of course, just to remind you, he's serving a 13-year sentence for the murder of his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, in 2014. The 36-year-old former Paralympic athlete having served just half of that sentence. We'll update you as we get confirmation there from that parole hearing. But let's turn now to the GB News People's Poll. Sir Keir Starmer being preferred over Rishi Sunak in addressing crime and antisocial behaviour. Of course, the government making that announcement just days ago. Well, 28% saying that the Labour leader, just 16% saying the Prime Minister is the man to handle that. However, a significant 45% say they just don't know. And in terms of the latest voting intention, Labour on 42%, the Tories on 24%, meaning, yes, if there were an election today, that would be a Labour landslide. But also in the poll, 12% of the public saying MPs should be allowed to have second jobs, 60% saying no, they should be banned altogether from having them. Well, joining us now, our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who's been going through these figures for us today. Just in terms of the headline on this, well, the government announced it, of course, on crime and antisocial behaviour. It doesn't seem in the short term to have a reverberation with the public.
No, it doesn't, does it? Because more people, 28%, think that Labour and Keir Starmer would deal with crime and antisocial behaviour better than Conservatives under Rishi Sunak at 16. Although, as you say, 45% say they don't know. So the government began the week with lots of policy announcements on cracking down on antisocial behaviour, laughing gas, graffiti, making people clean it up. But the poll was taken on Wednesday. That doesn't seem to have cut through. Similarly, Keir Starmer, one of his 5 missions is making Britain's streets safe. Again, that doesn't seem to have cut through. More people simply don't know.
Don't know. And of course, both parties, major parties, were hoping to have this as a message to break through, as you say, for the local elections, and wanting to have this as maybe a start towards a general election campaign. But looking at the state of the parties, it does seem to be pretty set at the moment, even there's a slight difference. I mean, the Tories aren't making major inroads into this Labour lead.
They're not yet. I mean, the gap is 18% this week, as opposed to 20% generally, but I mean, still within the margin of error. So there seems to be a small amount of tightening between them. Now, the Conservatives will hope that if and when Rishi Sunak is able to deliver on his 5 priorities, that will begin to narrow. But of course, inflation, the OBR say it's going to be 2.9% by the end of the year, but it's just gone up again. All these things, getting growth, cutting the debt.
Food bills going up.
It's going to take a lot of time, and people are really feeling worse off, and a lot of people's bills going up from tomorrow.
So we've reflected on don't knows. What they do know is that they don't want MPs doing second jobs, 60%.
That's pretty clear, isn't it? I think only 12% of people said that they thought it was OK. This, of course, is off the back of last weekend's big sting operation led by donkeys, where we had various... They were Conservative ex-ministers primarily, Matt Hancock included, although currently he's had the whip withdrawn, Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor, talking by video to this non-existent fake South Korean company, saying potentially they would work as consultants for £10,000 a day. And of course, a lot of people will look at that, people struggling to pay their bills, their wages not rising with inflation, and they'll think, £10,000 a day, you're being paid £84,000 a year
For supposedly a full-time job.
for a full-time job looking after your constituents' interests. Why on earth should you be chasing 10,000 a day? I think it will be really quite offensive to some people. Now, of course, Labour have said that if they get in, they would ban second jobs, although it's not entirely clear, because then there's are some second jobs okay? Like, for instance, people that work in the NHS as doctors or nurses, they have to keep up a certain level of work.
Or
to
can they
maintain
add
their...
value to their position within government in terms of their expertise when they're talking about certain issues, of course, which is the other issue.
And also, although obviously there's many Conservatives, notably, that have very well-paying second jobs, plenty of Labour too, most notably Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy, that has...
As Dominic Raab pointed out, Prime Minister, or PMQs,
has a radio show, paid quite a lot of money. And obviously we've got plenty of Conservative MPs on this channel. Now, the argument there is that part of an MP's job is reaching out to the public, engaging with the public, hearing what the public think, and that if you have a job in the media, that is what you're doing. So, but it's interesting. Certainly the majority of people do not like it at all.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that. And, of course, we'll update you with all the figures as they come through. But let's update you with what's been happening at the Old Bailey. We'll have latest from Mark White on that. Remember that couple with the baby and the remains of that baby found, of course, north of Brighton. Tragic case. That coming up for you shortly. But let's get all the other headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 2:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Britain has joined an 11-nation trans-Pacific bloc in its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU.
We've just agreed one of the biggest trade deals of all time.
After nearly 2 years of negotiations, the UK is now part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal will cut UK tariffs on cheese, cars, chocolate, gin and whiskey, and it's expected to boost the economy by £1.8 billion over 10 years. It'll also build new post-Brexit trade links with Brunei and Malaysia. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the deal provides a good opportunity for growth. Oscar Pistorius will not be released early from his jail sentence for killing his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp. In the last few minutes, the former Paralympian's been denied parole. The 36-year-old's halfway through his 13-year sentence for shooting Miss Steenkamp at his home in South Africa on Valentine's Day in 2013. A man and a woman arrested following a double murder in Cambridgeshire have been released with no further action. A third man remains in custody. The two victims, named locally as 57-year-old Gary Dunmore and his 32-year-old son Josh, died on Wednesday. Police are investigating whether the shootings at separate properties in Sutton and Bluntisham were linked to a custody battle. Two teenagers have been arrested in connection with the death of an elderly woman in Suffolk. Officers were called to a house in Pakefield at 2 p.m. on Saturday after reports 82-year-old Joy Middleditch had been found lying on the floor following a robbery. Two boys, aged 15 and 14, both from Lowestoft area, have been arrested on suspicion of murder. And an explosion in space, the same size as our entire solar system, has left scientists baffled. It happened 180 million light years away, and astronomers say it was much flatter than they ever thought possible. Instead of spherical, it was disc-shaped. Scientists say it changes everything they thought they knew about space explosions. TV online, DAB+ radio, and on TuneIn, this is GB News. It's back to Mark very shortly.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, care workers in Lincolnshire say they fear for patient safety and their jobs if a plan to cut home care providers from 70 to just 4 goes ahead. Well, the small care companies losing contracts say the decisions to take away NHS patients could force them to shut down. Lincolnshire's Integrated Care Board said that the move would create a consistent standard of quality. The carers are protesting at the decision. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been to find out more.
Choice in care, choice in care, choice in care, choice in...
Care workers soon to be without anyone to care for. New NHS home care contracts in Lincolnshire cut out small businesses in favour of just 4 companies. Outside management officers in Sleaford, carers like Esme say their jobs and patients are at risk.
The people we have now, we will lose. They will be sent to this new provider. You know, we've had years with them.
The NHS currently use around 70 smaller care providers across the whole of Lincolnshire. New contracts don't include them. Some of Esme's patients at Lincolnshire Home Care need mental health support. She's concerned for their future if they're taken away.
They've built up such a rapport with their regular support workers and, you know, we feel we know them inside out. They talk to us when they're having issues. Same as end-of-life care, you know, we've at the most saddest time in people's lives, we're providing care and they're just going to be pulled away from us.
Stop their contracts.
Lincolnshire Integrated Care Board says it advertised the new continuing healthcare contracts and sent emails to existing providers. Paddy says her team at Honeycomb Care didn't get anything. She thinks the change will push even more carers out of the industry at a time when it's already short-staffed.
We have some amazing carers. It would be a massive shame for the system to lose good carers when we're already struggling to find carers. It's going to have a massive impact on the health and social care sector in Lincolnshire because where are they going to find these carers from? They're going to have a lot of contracts to fill, they're going to need a lot of staff and they're not going to have them.
In a statement, Lincolnshire Integrated Care Board said the aim of the procurement was to improve responsiveness for requests for home care, to have consistent standard of quality and to build a foundation to create improvements in the domiciliary workforce.
In care, choice in care.
While contracts start on April 1st, the ICB says they'll be phased in. Esme says that she won't give up.
This is people's lives they're playing with. It's not fun and games. You know, we're in this job because we care. We don't do it for money. But our jobs are also at risk.
Will Hollis, GB News in Sleaford.
And another picture, of course, of the problems at the sharp end of both health and social care in Britain there from Will Hollis. Now, if you've taken a look out the window at the weather, you may think it's time to get away for Easter and have a bit of a break. You may find a problem with that if you're flying from Heathrow, particularly with British Airways. 72 flights so far cancelled today, and the reason is there are 10 days of strikes beginning at Terminal 5 in Heathrow after last-ditch talks failed to resolve a dispute over pay. Some 1,400 security staff from the United Union have walked out, so all the Easter flights set to be disrupted. Let's get the latest now from outside Heathrow with our reporter Thea Chicombo. And the picket line is, well, looking pretty damp behind you. One can't blame people wanting to get away from Easter, perhaps, Theo.
Yeah, you're right. If the weather's to go by, it's heavy rain. Those who are here for this strike have been here without no shadow of a doubt, regardless of the weather, since the early hours of this morning. And I'm kindly joined by Wayne, who's also been here. He's the regional representative for Unite Union in this area. Wayne, the weather is terrible, but I suppose it epitomises that you're taking this seriously regardless of the weather today.
Yeah, I think it's an absolute justification of what we're doing. You can't argue the commitment of the members and their determination to get a pay rise that is only right and fair for them. Like you said earlier, we've been here since 5:05 this morning. The support and the morale's been unwavering, and it's been the same across the other two picket lines across the airport. Members are determined to get a pay increase that they need and that they deserve.
Now, Heathrow have said Unite Union has refused the offer that's been given, including a lump sum just over £1,000. What's your response to that? Is that good enough? What exactly do you want?
I mean, we've been clear with the company all the way through that any increase has got to be on basic pay. Now, a lump sum payment does not suffice that. It goes quickly. But a lump sum payment is not sufficient, but an increase on the 10% is the only thing that's going to get this through. We've been consistent with that throughout with the employer. They know our stance on it. They know what the cost of living is currently. They know what RPI is, and anything below that is a real terms pay cut. And our members have suffered enough pay cuts because of COVID when they've fired and rehired every single one of them. It's just wrong. You know, we've got a CEO that's happy to accept an increase to £1.5 million a year, but then he believes that it's acceptable for his employees to take 10. It's just not right. He's got 34% of his staff, from a survey that we carried out, that are looking to leave or considering to leave employment with HAL within the next 6 months. It's not a good place to work, and they need to understand that and need to start addressing the concerns of their employees and start treating them with a little respect as well. And they're just not doing that.
Now, of course, today, dozens of flights have already been cancelled. Is this perhaps a message to send to those in management that this is something you're going to continue for the 10 days?
There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever. These strikes are on for 10 days. And I would imagine, I've heard that there's been up between 70 and 100 flights cancelled today. I haven't been able to look at it obviously, I've been on the picket lines, but if that's not a message, then what more do you want? You know, it is clearly having an impact. It's within the gift of HAL to get back round the table with us. If they want to do it, then enter into those negotiations meaningfully. Make sure that you come equipped to be able to make a decision and give us the pay we want, and this can all be resolved. But if they don't, we'll be here for the next 10 days and we'll be delivering strikes.
After those 10 days, if no deal is reached, what then?
Then we may well look to be forced to issue more dates. And you know, other people now, other workers in HAL are looking at this and going, OK, maybe then we will go on strike as well. So there's nothing to say that this strike isn't going to grow if Heathrow Airport don't do the right thing and get back round the table and give an increase that these members need. This isn't about what they want, this is about what they need.
Wayne, thank you so much in this rain. As you've heard from there passionately about why they are here, they're going to be here. This is the first of 10 days and hopefully they want a better pay offer from Heathrow and they will be here on the picket line. This is just one of them. 1,400 members who work in security are on the picket line.
Thea, thank you to you for braving those conditions and bringing us the latest there from outside Heathrow and much appreciated to everyone. Thank you very much indeed. We'll keep you updated, of course, on events over the next 10 days. As we were saying, so far, 72 flights cancelled by BA today, Terminal 5. You're being urged to contact the airline, of course, to check if you were due to travel out of Heathrow. Now, it is the final day of this historic first state visit by the King and Queen Consort to Hamburg, or to Germany, in Hamburg this afternoon. And it has been, by all accounts, a very successful occasion, and this is the Schuppen 52 warehouse on the southern side of Hamburg port, and there's very much a musical theme to this last official event. This is, I think, the band of the Royal Marines, and we've got a local pipe band and also a Beatles tribute group to play shortly, bearing in mind the connection with Hamburg. Let's have a listen in. Well, this is the Royal Marines Drum and March Band in the Schuppen 52 warehouse, where everyone has gathered on this final official event of the state visit. And they are, as ever, immaculately turned out, as is their musical performance. I'm just looking through the list. We may want to stay with this because we have coming up Anastasia Rose, a German female DJ near the main stage, the folk duo Ferris and Sylvester, and then we have a local celebrity sea shanty band called Die Tampentrekker, followed by, and this is the finale, the Silver Spoons, a Hamburg-based Beatles cover band. And one member from the UK, of course, just to reiterate, that's where the Beatles, or even as the Silver Beatles as they were, learned their craft with the various, I think on the Reeperbahn, if I remember, the various bars of Hamburg where they honed their craft. The applause here in Schuppen 52, the warehouse venue. I'm not sure whether we can see the King and Queen at the moment, but enjoying the band of the Royal Marines. And the music continues. Let's bring in Cameron, our royal reporter, who's still stuck, I think, in the square in Hamburg. Not too far away, but you won't be able to enjoy this musical finale, Cameron.
I know, Mark, what a shame. I can hear it in my ear, though, let me assure you, and it stopped raining, so I'm pretty happy being here in the square in Hamburg, just outside of the City Hall, where obviously the King and Queen consorts were there earlier greeting the crowds who packed this square. But as you are saying, the current spot for the King and Queen consorts is this reception at the Schuppen 52 building, I suppose, near the port of Hamburg. Lots and lots of musical performances going on. You mentioned the Royal Marines bands. There's a traditional Hamburg sea shanty band which will perform in a flash mob style near some the sponsors' stalls. The King and Queen consort will also get to listen to Germany's Eurovision entry for this year as well. So it's essentially the grand finale, if you like, of this 3-day state visit to Germany. 3 days of cementing those ties between Britain and Britain and Germany in this post-Brexit world. Of course, it's the UK government who decides where a state visit should go. Gives advice to Buckingham Palace as to where it should go, and they thought perhaps it was appropriate for us to try and shore up relations between one of our closest neighbours, a European powerhouse such as Germany. It's been a very, very busy day of engagements here, bearing in mind they only arrived in Hamburg probably very late morning, and they have somehow managed to fit in, 5 engagements so far today, and this is the last one. Very short and sharp engagements. Cameron? I think the logistics and choreography involved. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I think we've got the sea shanty starting. Let's see if we can just bring that in. No, it's a very quiet sea shanty. Oh, here they go.
Okay.
No, I'm afraid perhaps it's musicians' union rights. I'm not sure, but we're not able to pick that up for the moment. However, the Queen consort and the King are looking suitably impressed by that. Just reflecting, Cameron, they must be absolutely exhausted after this. It really has been whirlwind, hasn't it?
Oh, it certainly has. And remember, they are both in their 70s, but this is only half the state visit it was meant to be. Of course, it was meant to be last weekend that we started in Paris for the French part of this two-country state visit, or what was meant to be a two-country state visit. But due to those ongoing protests in France, due to pension reforms, and some of which had turned violent, the French government asked the British government and Buckingham Palace to postpone that part of the tour. So the King and Queen consort have only had to do half of it. However, they have packed so much in to this 3-day state visit. A number of topics, if you like, have been covered. We have had the traditional glitz and glamour with the state banquet, and then we had the political bilateral relationship building, if you like, with the King addressing the German Bundestag, the German Parliament yesterday. And then the humanitarian engagements, which is pretty custom with state visits such as this, but particularly the fact that this is the first state visit since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Inevitably, there were a number of engagements involving both military personnel and refugees. Some of the Ukrainian refugees who have settled here in Germany since that war began, over 1 million have settled, were actually here in the square in Hamburg, just outside the city hall. And I spoke to a few of them earlier, and they were here in the rain for hours, waiting for King Charles and Queen Camilla, because they wanted to thank them personally for the support that the King and Queen Consort has shown the country. The King actually paid tribute and praised the German hospitality for taking in quite so many refugees during his speech at the state banquet at the Bellevue Palace in Berlin on the first night, I think it was, of the state visit. And then again, he praised the courage of Germany during the speech he gave at the Bundestag yesterday in Germany for sending in for sending military equipment to Ukraine. But I think today this reception that's going on at Schuppe 52 is all about celebrating German and British cultures together. As you mentioned, there's Royal Marines bands, there's obviously traditional German folk music as well, Eurovision, so we're getting a bit of young and old, modern and perhaps slightly more traditional tunes being played to entertain the King and Queen Consorts, and of course entertaining the 1,000 guests that have been invited to this particular reception, and they include youth groups and also the British Embassy officials, as well as perhaps you can expect, and a number of organisations associated with Hamburg and the port of Hamburg. So the King and Queen Consorts are meeting a lot of people at the moment.
And clearly the handshakes are continuing with people, and one can see the delight on people's faces when he's taking time to speak to them, whether it's at these official functions or indeed out in the square where you were a little earlier. And this is really beginning to be a stamp now of this new monarchy, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, but we've talked about King Charles wanting a slimmed-down monarchy. We've also talked about what kind of king King Charles wants to be, and I've got the impression over the last 3 days that he wants to be approachable to ordinary members of the public, whether they are British or German or indeed from any other country. There was perhaps a fear following the death of Queen Elizabeth II that the monarchy would lose its star power, particularly with its international influence, and would become less of a trump card for the British government to play in diplomatic relations. Yeah. I think this state visit has proven that that's not the case, and it's the institution of the monarchy that stands firm and stands strong rather than the individual.
And interesting, you know, you've talked about soft power, soft diplomacy. I mean, it has been very political with a small p in terms of the messages about democracy and war in Europe once more. And, of course, the whole issue of Germany giving the Ukrainian refugees the welcome and the shelter. I mean, they all are very pointed comments he's made along the way.
Yes, the King chooses his engagements very carefully, and I think we saw that particularly yesterday in Berlin with the engagements involving both Ukrainian refugees. The King was at one refugee centre, the Queen Consort was at another, but the King was also in northern Berlin, just outside of Berlin really, viewing a military exercise, a joint military exercise between both Britain and Germany. It was all about building quite literal building a bridge, as we are building metaphorical diplomatic bridges as well, using amphibious vehicles. The British personnel taking part were the Royal Engineers, and this week it was announced that King Charles is their new Colonel-in-Chief, and he was wearing the Colonel-in-Chief's tie. And it's the only kind of regiment, if you like. Regiment's the wrong word, but it's the only kind of regiment that involves both British troops are involved with another country's military personnel, because of course Britain and Germany are both NATO allies, and because the war in Ukraine is continuing and the Russian invasion is continuing, perhaps they were hoping for a visual representation of how strong perhaps two countries can be when they work together in the face of aggression, which is indeed a theme that King Charles touched on very much so in his speech.
Yeah, under that NATO umbrella, and of course one reflects on both Anglo and German troops being stationed there in the Cold War in terms of a bulwark against Russian aggression, and seemingly things have not changed that much in the interim years. But interesting to see that the King is taking so much time to talk to people. We ought to apologise that we weren't able to bring you the Hamburg sea shanty, but I'm not quite sure what the position is about the Beatles tribute band, the Silver Spoons, Hamburg-based, because of course this is the other issue for fans of the Beatles, Cameron. This is where they cut their teeth in the various bars on the Reeperbahn in Hamburg.
Yeah, they certainly have a famous association with the city, Mark, and I think that was the whole point of kind of including a tribute band to the Beatles, because it's kind of British and German cultures clashing, if you like, which is why I think we've got such a variety of musical performances going on in this, 55 minutes to an hour-long engagement that we've got, because Buckingham Palace describes this whole state visit, the aim of the state visit, even before they left London, that it's about celebrating our collective or joint cultures and community. And that's exactly what we're seeing playing out here.
Yeah, and I think he touched on that in the speech, of course, about the shared humour, because I know there is this, every Christmas they play this very old black and white comedy sketch, British television, Dinner for One, and that raised a laugh.
Yeah, it certainly did. It's every New Year's Eve, we're told, on pretty much every channel in Germany, that Dinner for One sketch is played. And during the King's speech at the state banquet, so the first speech he made, he did make a reference to that and kind of jokingly thanks the German people for not letting him be the only person sat at the table by himself. I think, i.e. he's pretty popular, I think, perhaps here in Germany.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed for taking us through this historic visit in the square there in Hamburg, and of course those scenes at the Hamburg Schuppen 52. Thank you very much indeed. And of course the RAF Voyager due to leave a little later with, we're being told, 2 Typhoons of the Luftwaffe in terms of guarding that plane as it leaves German airspace. What a change from 80 years ago. Anyway, that's it from us, but Patrick is with you for this afternoon. We're back with you at 12 noon on Monday, and we'll update you, of course, as ever, on all the breaking news here on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the